Hearing for Thursday, May 19th, 2016. I'd like to remind members of the public that the Commission does not tolerate any disruption or outbursts of any kind. Please silence your mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings, and when speaking before the Commission, if you care to, do state your name for the record. I'd like to take roll at this time. Commission President Fong?
Here.
Commission Vice President Richards?
Here.
Commissioner Hillis?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Moore?
Here.
And Commissioner Wu?
Here.
Commissioner Antonini is present, just not at the dais at the moment. Commissioners, first on your calendar is consideration of items proposed for continuance. Item 1, case number 2013.0517X at 98 Pennsylvania Street. Large project authorization is proposed for continuance to September 22nd, 2016. Item 2 for case number 2013.1711 CUA at 495 Cambridge Street. A conditional use authorization is proposed for indefinite continuance. Commissioners, further on your agenda, we have just received a request to continue items 10A and B for case numbers 2013.0677 CUA and X at 2000 through 2070 Bryant Street, conditional use authorization and large project authorization to June 2nd.
Okay, thank you. Is there any public comment on the now 3 items proposed for continuance?
I do have 2 speaker cards for 2000 Bryant, items 10A and B. However, at this time, you can only submit public testimony on the matter of the continuance itself.
And that is a Jordan Davis and a David Gibson.
Hi, Jordan Davis, and I support the continuance 1,000%.
David Gibson, I support the continuance 1,000%. Thank you.
Commissioners, Michael Terrio, San Francisco Building and Construction Trades Council. Most of you have a copy of a letter I just did. Unfortunately, I, in a great hurry, did not produce 7 copies, so one of you is short of one, I'm sorry to say. Sorry, Christine. But we also support the continuance. We actually wish it were a couple of weeks longer, but we do think that we can work through some issues with the developer if they're willing to come to the table and work with us closely, and we look forward to that prospect. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. Most of you have heard from me way too much this week. I definitely do support a continuance, which is what I was originally here to ask for. However, I was hoping it would be much longer than 2 weeks. But I do thank you for considering that message coming out that the developer should sit down with the Labor and Community Alliance that has formed, that has more resources to bring to the table, and that also has increased needs for this type of project to really be scrutinized and considered on all the impacts that we'll have between this project and the other 2,000 luxury units that are in the pipeline. I urge you to actually consider postponing this a little further. I've been asking Podell to sit down, and if I read and believe what the Chronicle said today, the mayor was unaware that we had a proposal that you've all had for the last month. And there's a lot going on in the mayor's office that I don't quite understand. I'd like to actually sit down with the mayor's office of housing, as they clearly are doing with the developer. So I would like that the community, that the mayor's office, first of all, represent the actual community and not just private developers, and also help facilitate these negotiations that we would like to sit down and discuss. We have many people coming on their way, because we only just now heard that the continuance would be granted, and we had heard that it would be possibly granted after our testimony. So please be prepared at general comments. There should be a couple hundred people who still have something to say about this project. And I do encourage you to give us a little more time beyond June 2nd. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Steve Vettel for LeBron Martel on behalf of the project sponsor of the 2000 Bryant project. We don't object to a 2-week continuance, and we would object to anything longer than that. I understand your calendar is difficult, and the 2 weeks will work, and so we're not in opposition and in support of a 2-week continuance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any additional public comment on the items proposed for continuance?
My name is Rick Hall. I do support a continuance. I believe that a month would be much more appropriate than 2 weeks. I think I certainly agree that the developer and the community should sit down together. But I've also got another concern, and that's with the CPE. I don't think it can be approved with the information that's been provided so far.
Mr. Hall, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but at the present time, you can only speak to the matter of continuance.
Understand. Okay.
Any additional public comment? Okay, not seeing any public comments closed. Commissioner Antonini.
Well, I'm happy to see that there is an offer that has some promise that might help to fund perhaps a few more affordable units and do some other things that would make the project an even better project, although in my opinion it's a very good project already. And it would have been nice if we had heard about this a little bit earlier than a couple of days before. But anyway, I think it's important that we continue it to the 2nd of June. I think the generous offer, we should be able to find out if in fact that is legitimate and what it would encompass, and hopefully it can be done without any changes to the project as it's now designed, which has been laid out very well with the possible exception of more affordable units. And so I'm going to move to continue to June 2nd.
Second.
As well as the other items.
Along with all the accompanying items.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
You went for all the items that have been continued.
Under the matter, well, we can call them separately, but there are two other items.
Do it at one time, yeah. Items 1 and 2, I believe they are.
Thank you.
Second.
Commissioner Richards.
This question for Mr. Theriault. You'd asked for longer than 2 weeks. What do you think you can get done in 2 weeks? I mean, the project sponsors agreed.
You know, if discussions are fairly intense and information is adequately forthcoming, we could get quite a bit done in 2 weeks. If I am obliged to have discussions with national organizations, that may take a little longer. But we may know at the end of 2 weeks whether that's needed or not.
Sure. All I will ask of you and Mr. Vettel is if you are coming up to a point where you feel like you need more time, you let us know a little bit in advance so that we can get the word out beyond June 2nd.
Happily.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Moore.
Excuse me, but I'd like to remind us that next week is a holiday, so there is de facto no ability for us to influence it. I also like to remind us that if there are changes to any of the documents, that they have to be in the department within a certain advance of time. We should not forget looking at that as a realistic date for these people to talk with each other.
Commissioner Hillis.
I'm also supportive of the continuance. I think, a lot of these issues have been out there and on the table, and we'll have either resolution or know where these issues are heading, or we'll know that there's not resolution and we've got to make decisions at the commission. So I'm supportive of the continuance and would urge kind of parties to work with that goal of trying to resolve this in the next 2 weeks.
Commissioners, if there's nothing further, there's a motion that has been seconded to continue items as they have been.
Sorry, John. It's Commissioner Moore.
I would like the department to lay out the timeline by which decisions have to be made in order documents which need to be changed to be properly filed to be in the commission package. I was caught myself in agreeing to a continuance on another project only to realize that because of the submittal requirements, it's almost impossible to meet when there is a holiday in between or somebody is out of town for the holiday, etc. I just want to be realistic. because the calendar of the required submittal documents in the department plus the holiday, which is next Thursday, affects what we do.
Just so you know, Commissioners, that next week you're not meeting, but it's actually not a holiday. You would have, if there are architectural changes that are happening to the project, we will make sure those get to you in your packet a week in advance. My sense from what I'm hearing, and I've just learned of this today myself, is that it's probably not architectural issues that will change, but other aspects of the project. But if there are architectural issues, we will certainly get those to you in your packet next Thursday.
Okay.
All right, Commissioners, if there's nothing further, then there is a motion that has been seconded to continue items as proposed. Commissioner Antonini?
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Wu?
Aye.
Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
And Commissioner President Fong?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 7-1. Commissioners, it'll place us on your consent calendar. There is one item under your consent calendar that is considered to be routine by the Planning Commission and may be acted upon by a single roll call vote of the Commission. There will be no separate discussion of this item unless a member of the Commission, the public, or staff so requests, in which event the matter shall be removed from the consent calendar and considered as a separate item at this or a future hearing. Item 3, case number 2015-011424 CUA at 601 Van Ness Avenue. This is a conditional use authorization. I have no speaker cards.
Is there any public comment on the one item on the consent calendar? Not seeing any public comment is closed. Commissioner Richards.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion to approve item 3 under consent, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Wu.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 7-0 and places us under Commission matters. Item 4, consideration of adoption draft minutes for the May 5th joint hearing and the May 5th regular hearing.
Is there any public comment on the draft minutes? Not seeing any public comment is closed. And anyone like to make a motion to approve draft minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion to adopt the minutes for May 5th joint and regular hearings, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Wu.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 7-0 and places us under item 5, Commission comments and questions.
Commissioner Richards.
I just wanted to let the public know that in our packet this week, we had the 2014-2015 annual report that the department produced. It's chock full of everything and anything that you would want to know about planning, building, and historic preservation, and I'd urge you to get a copy or go online and take a look at it. It's really informative. Thanks.
Commissioner Antonini.
Also in our packet this week was some information on possible legislation proposed for short-term rentals, and I would assume that will come before us for a future hearing, or would not?
I was going to talk about that during my comments.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you very much. New topic. So it's my understanding we're moving forward on that joint hearing with SFMTA that I've been talking about for 2 years. So I'm really happy about that and wanted to start on a new topic. Lately I've been talking to a number of developers, particularly who are doing commercial spaces, and sort of asking them, why are you paying the child care facility fee rather than potentially providing those services on site? And a lot of the times the answer that I get is because there's no physical ability to have child care facilities on a lot of these sites because of the rules around how much open space you have to have, how much internal enclosure and separation from other public uses that you have to have, et cetera. And so what I would love is just a request for either maybe a memo or even potentially a hearing date to talk about child care facilities and how the planning code and maybe even the building code helps us or doesn't help us in getting more child care facilities in San Francisco. Thanks.
Okay.
If there's nothing further, Commissioners, we can move on to department matters. Item 6, Director's announcements.
Thanks, Jonas. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Commissioners, if I may just quickly, Commissioner Johnson will happy to do that. One of the things that we've learned over the years is that many of those requirements are actually in state law. Mm-hmm. But we'll be happy to do a memo to summarize those and separate what's under the control of the state versus what the city can control.
Yeah, and again, that's asking because maybe I don't know that I've seen a developer that has a very clear, concise understanding of all those restrictions, and it'd be great to have it in place.
Certainly. Secondly, with respect to the short-term rental legislation, of course, you spent a lot of time on this last year. The proposed legislation is an amendment to the short-term rental legislation, which lives in the administrative code, not in the planning code. So it technically doesn't require your hearing. They have a very short time frame, and we had not recommended a hearing on this because it covers many of the issues that the Commission discussed last year. And the Commission weighed in on these issues last year, and in fact, all of the substance of this current legislation were issues that you reviewed last year. So it was. Our thought was that we would would prepare the memo outlining the details of this legislation to you, but then the board would take up this legislation. I believe it's coming pretty quickly to the board for hearing in the next couple of weeks. And just to summarize that legislation very quickly. It would modify, it would hold, one of the things it would do that the Commission had discussed would be to hold the platforms responsible for when units were listed without a registration number, something that we had discussed a lot in this hearing last year. It would also grant citation authority to the Planning Department for short-term rentals and provide for penalties and so on. These were issues that were discussed last year at this commission. So the thinking was, and speaking to the commission president and vice president, that a hearing wasn't necessarily needed here, and because it was part of the admin code, it would just move right to the board. That concludes my comments.
Question.
Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, and I would assume because the election in 2015 was not a charter amendment, it does not require a vote of the public to make alterations to what the short-term rental law is in effect. It can be done by the Board of Supervisors.
That legislation didn't pass last year for the short-term.
Right, I know it didn't pass the voters.
But didn't pass the ballot, yeah.
But I'm saying that, no, it wasn't charter and it also didn't pass, so that's two reasons why it wouldn't have to go to the voters.
Commissioner Richards.
Just a quick point of clarification, Director Ram. When you say the department has citation authority, is the department still a part of the Office of Short-Term Rentals Enforcement, or is there a separate unit? Can you elaborate on that for us?
I think the proposal would still keep it with the Office of Short-Term Rentals, but would improve the enforcement capabilities and mechanisms.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, it'll place us on item 7, review of past events at the Board of Supervisors, Board of Appeals, and the Historic Preservation Commission.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs. At this week's land use hearing, the committee heard the proposed landmark designation for the former Alamany Emergency Hospital and Health Center. The center is located at 35 Onondaga Avenue in the Excelsior Outer Mission neighborhood. This is a community-sponsored landmark designation. The HPC voted to recommend the landmark designation to the board on March 16th of this year. The Alamany Center was part of a citywide system of emergency hospitals that became known as one of the most comprehensive and elaborate of its kind in the United States. Constructed in 1933, the Alamany Center was the final piece in the system. Rendered in Spanish Baroque and Spanish colonial styles, both buildings were designed by master city architect Charles H. Sawyer, who oversaw the design and construction of numerous schools and hospitals in the city. A further note, the interior of the health center features 2 frescoes painted in 1934 by noted muralist Bernard Zackheim, who also painted the library mural at Coit Tower. After department staff's presentation and supportive opening remarks by Supervisor Avalos, several community members also spoke in support. The committee then voted to forward a positive recommendation to the full Board of Supervisors. At the full board this week, Supervisor Kim's ordinance that would allow accessory massage uses in the North of Market Special Residential Use District passed its second read. And the appeal of the conditional use authorization for 1066 Market was continued to June 28th, 2016. There were two introductions of note this week. The first was an ordinance sponsored by Supervisor Peskin. It amends the planning code to clarify that all non-commercial signs are exempt from regulations pursuant to Article 6. It increases penalties for repeat violations for the display of illegal general advertising signs. It shortens the time before penalties for general advertising sign violations begin to accrue, and allows property liens for such penalties to go unpaid. The second ordinance was sponsored by Supervisor Kim, and it's related to 1066 Market. It's an ordinance waiving inclusionary housing requirements, exempting certain floor area from the calculation of gross floor area and transfer development rights requirements, and authorizing land dedication at no cost. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, I had a question. Has consideration been given to historical recognition of park emergency? I think the building's still there. That was also another one of these satellites of emergency hospitals. Actually, a scene from Dirty Harry was filmed in that park emergency, too.
I can have Tim Fry answer that for you. What was the building again?
It was just like Alamany Emergency. There's also a small emergency hospital on Stanton Street. It was called Park Emergency.
It's already a landmark.
It already is.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
And the Board of Appeals did meet last night. I think two items that may be of interest. The first is 88 Arkansas. You had heard this as a large project authorization on March 3rd. One of the components of this was a unit mix exception. They actually provided the correct number of units, but they had the nested bedrooms that don't meet with the current zoning administrator interpretation. The appeal last night was in regards to the appropriate standards for review. Up until last year, Section 329 actually referenced variance findings, that the Commission must make the same findings to grant this exception that we do for variances. That was inadvertently removed last year as part of a code cleanup. That was removed, so those standards don't apply. That's how you reviewed it under the current law. We will be bringing this kind of correction to put back in those findings back to you in related or similar legislation that is scheduled for hearing on, I believe, June 16th. So we'll have further discussion about that. At the hearing, the board unanimously upheld the Commission's decision, finding that the project was appropriately reviewed and approved, and you did not err or abuse your discretion. The other item is 663rd Street. This was a notice of violation penalty that was issued last year. This was in relation to an action you took in 2014. There was a legalization proposal to legalize the conversion of the entire building from warehouse to office. The Commission approved it, but limited the office allocation and then the conditional use approval to the upper 2 stories of the building. During the appeal process, the appellant argued that the building had always been used as office historically. We found applications from 1987 where it's been the same owner since 1962, and we had applications from 1987 where they had stated the existing use of the building as warehouse. There had been a variance granted for conversion of warehouse to retail. There was notices of special restrictions. There was no permit to actually establish office use at this building. Then again, a couple years ago, they came in for the actual process to legalize it, and you made your decision. There was no appeal of that decision. That decision is final. So we pursued enforcement, ensuring that your decision was perfected. Last night at the appeal hearing, the appellant argued that they were treated differently from other applicants who had similar projects, including one across the street at 665 3rd Street that had been approved. The board had questions about, why this was different from that other project. I noted that there are, some changes in our policies in terms of preserving PDR, also concerns with office allocation and the dwindling resource that is, and that informed your decision. You still did approve a project there, but it was then a small cap authorization under your approval. The board last night continued the item for 6 months to December. On December 7th, they did not state an exact reason why. I think part of it, twofold. One, to give the property owner time to perhaps address the violation, to remove those illegal office uses from the first 2 stories of the building, and also to see what may be in store for the property under the proposed Central Soma corridor rezoning efforts. I pointed out that it's unlikely to change much, that it's still going to require an office allocation. Even if it is maybe a permitted use rather than a conditional use, it's still going to need to come back before you. But we will update you in December on that item. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Richards.
Oh, just a couple of questions. One, was it a full Board of Appeals last night?
Oh, we were down 1 commissioner, so it was 4 out of the 5.
So it could have ended up in a tie.
Yeah, I mean, it could have. There were a lot of possibilities, yeah. But they chose, it was a 3-to-1 vote to continue.
Okay. And are fees accruing?
No, penalties are not accruing. That was made clear to the board, that penalties are not accruing now and will not accrue until after there's a final decision on this, hopefully in December.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tim Fry here to share with you a few items from yesterday's Historic Preservation Commission hearing. It was a fairly short hearing. The day began with the Architectural Review Committee reviewing 2 projects. One, a second Living Innovation Zone installation across from the Asian Art Museum. It's a temporary installation. The commissioners that are part of the committee were very supportive of the design, which is being prepared by a non-for-profit that works with high school students, and they are developing a design that incorporates Chinese dragon in with some reoccurring or rotating art from the Asian Art Museum. The second item the ARC provided review and comment on was a revised pedestrian shelter for the Van Ness BRT in front of City Hall. As you recall, the Commission asked MTA to review and restudy a more streamlined canopy and pedestrian structure within the median to better reflect the architectural characteristics of Civic Center. MTA has provided a revised design, which the ARC was very supportive of, and believes they met the sort of the goals and the direction that the full commission gave the MTA. That item will then be back before the full commission for a C of A in June. Then the full hearing commenced with a fairly short calendar. There was one certificate of appropriateness for a new elevator structure at landmark number 41, St. Mark's Lutheran Church, up at 1135 O'Farrell Street. And then the commission reviewed the Academy of Art existing sites technical memorandum, which I believe you will also be reviewing today. The commission was very supportive of the department's work to date and felt that the schedule and sort of the outstanding items that we will be bringing to the HPC was sufficient, and in particular that was related to the 10 sites that require certificates of appropriateness or permits to alter under Article 10 and 11 of the Planning Code. That concludes my comments, unless you have any questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Commissioners, it'll place this under general public comment not to exceed a period of 15 minutes. At this time, members of the public may address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission, except agenda items. With respect to agenda items, your opportunity to address the Commission will be afforded when the item is reached in the meeting. Each member of the public may address the Commission for up to 3 minutes. I have no speaker cards.
Okay, is there any general public comment? Okay, not seeing any general public comment is closed.
Commissioners, it'll place this under your regular calendar. Item 8 for case number 2015-016599 PCA, Affordable Housing in Divisadero and Fillmore Neighborhood Commercial Transit Districts. This is a Planning Code amendment.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Menika Mohan, Planning Staff, and I'm here today to recommend approval for adoption of the change in affordable housing fee or units in the rezoned Divisadero and Fillmore Neighborhood Commercial Transit Districts. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the legislation and our department recommendations, and Connor Johnson, when he arrives, will also provide some comments. So currently, properties along Divisadero Street and Fillmore Street Neighborhood Commercial Transit Districts, or NCTs, are subject to the rules of Section 415, which require that any housing project of 10 or more units is subject to participate in the inclusionary housing ordinance. The proposed ordinance recognizes that any properties proposed along Divisadero Street and the Fillmore Street NCTs that have increased residential potential due to the rezoning would be subject to the following. If the project sponsor chooses to pay the fee, the project shall pay an affordable housing fee equivalent to the requirement of 25% of the units in the principal project as affordable units. If a project sponsor chooses to do on-site housing, the project sponsor shall provide 23 of all of the units constructed on the project site as affordable housing. And if the project sponsor wishes to provide units as an off-site project from the principal project, they shall construct or cause to be constructed 25% of all the units, subject to the requirements of 415. The legislation also includes a clause that if the charter amendment on June 7th is to pass, the higher rates from the charter would become effective. There are 5 recommendations today that the department is proposing and that are reflected in the updated resolution. Department staff want to thank the Community Council of Housing Organizations, or CHOOCH, for bringing to our attention recommendation number 1. The first recommendation is to ensure that the affordable housing fees generated through the development of the Divisadero Street and Fillmore Street NCT should be deposited into the citywide affordable housing fund and use the same criteria as the citywide inclusionary program. The proposed ordinance names the following criteria for the use of funds. 1, to increase the supply of the housing affordable to qualifying households in the Divisadero and Fillmore Street NCT. 2, to increase the supply of affordable housing within 1 mile of the boundaries of the Divisadero Street and Fillmore Street NCT. And 3, to increase the supply of housing affordable to qualifying households in the city. To date, all affordable housing fees generated through the inclusionary program are deposited into the citywide affordable housing fund. This allows the city to maximize funds generated throughout the city to increase the affordable housing supply. If the funds are restricted to one specific zoning district, it limits the ability of the city to access those funds for affordable housing in other areas of the city. Furthermore, this would set a new precedent for the inclusionary program and could lower the total amount of money available to the citywide fund by siphoning off one particular zoning district. Therefore, the department recommends amending the language in the ordinance to have the same criteria for the use of funds as the citywide inclusionary program. Recommendation 2 is to create consistency with varying inclusionary affordable housing fees. The department recommends that the ordinance mirror the proposed trailing legislation for the inclusionary affordable housing fee regarding the on-site, off-site, and size of projects. This means that projects under 24 units would be subject to the current rate of 12%, and projects with 25 units or more would be subject to the inclusionary rates in the proposed trailing legislation. The department is recommending this change because, as currently written, the proposed rates would be lower than the citywide inclusionary rates proposed in Proposition C in June. Recommendation 3 is to modify the grandfathering for Divisadero and Fillmore NCT pipeline projects. The proposed trailing legislation for the charter amendment being voted on this June provides a lower inclusionary rate for projects in the pipeline depending on when a project submitted an environmental evaluation, or an EE. The rates are described in the slide above. Note that these rates are dependent on the amendments to the charter being approved by voters in June, and this ordinance being considered today does not grandfather any projects. Therefore, in the case of a project that an EE has filed, that would trigger a lower inclusionary rate if the new inclusionary rates become effective this June, the Divisadero and Fillmore rate would apply. In the past, the department has recommended that fair and uniform grandfathering practices be applied to projects in the pipeline. But projects in the Divisadero and Fillmore NCT are benefiting from a recent rezoning that significantly increased the development potential for some projects. Given that, the department recommends that projects receiving a 50% increase or more in residential density as compared to the old NCD zoning should be exempt from the grandfathering provisions in the trailing legislation. In other words, projects that have already filed an EE and have a 50% increase in residential density compared to that old NCD zoning would be subject to the full on-site rate, fee, and off-site requirement. If a project with an EE application already submitted has a proposed residential density that is not a 50% increase from the old NCD zoning, the grandfather rates in the trailing legislation would apply. 2 projects along the Divisadero and Divisadero corridor in the pipeline, and they have already submitted their EE applications. And both projects have more than a 50% increase in residential density, so they would be subject to these higher inclusionary rates. The 4th recommendation is clarifying the determination of residential potential. The current charter language states that a project through a special use district or other local legislation adopted after November 6, 2012, that either receives 1, a 20% or greater increase in developable residential gross floor area, or 2, a 50% or greater increase in residential densities over prior zoning, can increase the affordable housing requirement. The charter language being proposed on the June ballot does not include this language and allows the Board of Supervisors to change the inclusionary rate without a change to the charter. Given that the language in the charter may change, specific language should be in the ordinance that references the current charter language and the old zoning for the Divisadero and Fillmore commercial districts. If the charter amendment in June passes, there will no longer be a need to do the calculation for the increased residential density. And the final recommendation is to include a subsection in Section 415 that describes the new affordable housing fee for the Divisadero and Fillmore NCT districts. Currently, the ordinance creates a new code section, 428, to implement the new affordable housing fee. Given that this fee, our recommendation is that this fee follows the same procedures for the inclusionary affordable housing program, a new section rather than a new code section could describe the fee rates and direct the public to one consistent code. That concludes the staff presentation, and the department asks that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the ordinance with staff recommendations and the attached draft resolution to that effect. And Connor is here, so.
I was actually here all along. I was just lurking in the back with my frenemy, Alex Clements. Hi, Alex. Thank you, Menica. I just want to provide Connor Johnston, Legislative Aide to Board President London Breed. I just want to provide a little bit of background at the risk of being a little bit duplicative with what Menica said. But in November of 2012, voters passed Proposition C, which set the inclusionary requirements in the charter at 12% on-site and 12% off-site or fee. And I'm going to return to Prop C in a second. In the fall of 2014, President Breed passed legislation creating a named neighborhood commercial district, or NCD, along Fillmore Street between Bush and McAllister and along Divisadero Street between Haight and O'Farrell. The Planning Commission supported both of those pieces of legislation, and the Board of Supervisors passed them both unanimously. Then in the summer of 2015, President Breed passed legislation revising each of those NCDs to make them NCTs, T with the tango, meaning that residential density would be controlled by height and bulk, open space, rear yard setbacks, and exposure requirements instead of a numerical lot area ratio. In other words, more housing units would be allowed within a given building size. The Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors supported those unanimously. And here's where 2012's Prop C comes back into play. The density decontrol provisions in NCTs, and there are about a dozen of them throughout the city, help create more affordable units since those are set as a percentage of the total units. You get more affordable housing units and cheaper market rate units without any height or bulk increases for buildings. In that respect, NCTs are a great first step. But President Breed also wanted to increase the required percentage of affordable units. Unfortunately, under Prop C, that wasn't considered possible. There are certain exceptions in Prop C, what is now in the charter, where the inclusionary percentages can be increased. One is if there's a development agreement involved. Another is if it's a redevelopment project area or an IFD where you're using property tax increment. Another is a change in zoning that affects 40 or more acres. Neither of these NCTs were 40 or more acres. I actually think even combined they weren't. A project that receives public financing can have an exception to Prop C. A project that receives a density bonus through the state density bonus law, or if the city has a proprietary interest. None of those applied to these NCTs, thus there was no way to increase the inclusionary requirement under the charter. However, there is one other previously never used provision that says if other legislation or a special use district adopted after Prop C allows for a 20% or greater increase in developable residential gross floor area or a 50% or greater increase in residential densities over prior zoning, then you could increase the inclusionary requirement. So after a lot of careful consultation with the planning department, some of the staff who are here today, and your director, and the city attorney's office as well, in December of 2015, President Breed introduced legislation using that Prop C exception to create the highest inclusionary housing requirement in San Francisco history for projects within the NCT areas that exercise the density decontrol provisions to get a 50% or greater increase in residential units. And using what is now the outgoing 2007 Nexus study performed by Kaiser Marston and Associates, or Keyser, she set the inclusionary fee at the highest achievable level, 25%, and the on-site 25% for a fee or off-site, and the on-site rate slightly below at 23% in order to incent on-site development within the neighborhoods. Now, with all of that as prologue, and I think some of it we heard twice, the Board of Supervisors then introduced a charter amendment in December, which would largely undo 2012's Prop C. And to make it as confusing as possible, this one is also called Prop C. So 2016's Prop C will remove the inclusionary rates from the charter, and under separate trailing legislation, the new inclusionary rates would be 33% for a fee-out or off-site construction and 25% for on-site housing. The trailing legislation provides tiered grandfathering exemptions for projects already in the pipeline, and it requires a feasibility analysis to inform the inclusionary rates going forward. So as you can imagine, this has been a bit of a moving target over the last 4 or 5 months, not knowing if the inclusionary limits will remain in the charter or what the new inclusionary rates will be, depending both on if the new Prop C passes and the forthcoming feasibility analysis. So to be quite candid with you, the ordinance as drafted before you today is not the finished product because there are some undefined variables here. We have, however, worked closely with planning staff to try to simplify this and anticipate all possible outcomes. And I want to particularly thank Menaka Mohan again and Aaron Starr for all of their help in trying to navigate these two ongoing developments. For the sake of consistency, and because she largely agrees with the policy direction, President Breed would like the Divisadero and Fillmore NCTs to mirror the pending citywide inclusionary levels. She would like to create consistency with the varying inclusionary fees. That's staff recommendation number 1. President Breed also wants pipeline projects that are taking advantage of a 50% density increase under the NCT legislation to remain subject to the new inclusionary rates and not receive a grandfathering exemption. Those projects still have the option of not increasing their density over 50% and receiving the citywide grandfathered rate. This is staff recommendation number 2. Staff recommends adding the old density limits and the charter language to the ordinance for reference, and we agree. Ditto for the cleanup recommendation in number 4. And staff's addendum references a provision in the legislation that would earmark inclusionary fees for the respective NCT areas. This was largely a legacy provision from when there was going to be a marked difference between the NCT's rates and the citywide rates. Now that circumstance is moot, so it is appropriate to direct these funds to the Citywide Affordable Housing Fund, as is done with all other inclusionary affordable housing fees. Lastly, some commenters today may suggest that the inclusionary rates for pipeline projects within the NCTs should also be influenced by the forthcoming feasibility analysis. President Breed is receptive to that idea, and again, there are going to be further revisions as Prop C heads to the ballot on June 7th, as the inclusionary ordinance is finalized, and before this ordinance these ordinances go to the Land Use Committee. So with all of that said, I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you again for your consideration.
Thank you. Opening up to public comment, of which I have several speaker cards. Tess Wellborn. Lisa Aubrey.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Affordable Divisadero just learned of this ordinance yesterday, and I'm giving out copies of our letter to you, along with a copy of the Divisadero Community Plan. We would oppose this current ordinance as drafted for a number of reasons, 2 of which I will touch on. 1, there's been no community involvement. Great work with the planning department, but the community who's most affected by this proposed legislation has not had a chance to weigh in. Secondly, the plan does not in any way reflect the Divisadero Community Plan, which you have heard here. We've presented it many times and handed it to you many times. So I'll leave to other speakers other additional points about why this should be either radically changed or continued and reworked. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Additional speakers on this item. Mr. Preston.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Dean Preston, also with Affordable Divis. We need to stop the giveaway to developers along Divisadero without consulting the community. We're now in round 2 of this. So some of what Mr. Johnson talked about is accurate, some of it isn't. I want to highlight that Affordable Divis, after the rezoning last year, complained repeatedly about the massive upzoning, allowing doubling and tripling of the density along Divisadero and Fillmore without requiring any additional percentage. This was not some mystery that one could increase the affordable housing requirements when upzoning in this manner. It was well known to everyone at Affordable Divis, and I don't know why it took many months of community pressure to actually get some movement from the supervisor's office. Make no mistake about it, this, as currently drafted, this would yet again, for future projects, would say that there is no additional affordability along Divisadero. This is if Prop C passes. That's going to be the standard. So the same standard that would apply to any other project is going to now apply to any future Divisadero project, despite the fact that developers get a tripling of density along Divisadero. So at minimum, we need to make sure that any additional affordable requirements that are part of this ordinance are in addition to whatever the baseline is, whether that's 12% going forward or the new standard under Prop C. But developers have gotten a massive density increase along Divisadero, and we can and must insist on the maximum affordability that we legally can require on top of baseline inclusionary. Second point is that the fees, the relationship between the in lieu fee and the on-site requirement needs to be adjusted so that there's an incentive to provide on-site housing. That's part of our community plan, as well as Supervisor Breed's office has stated an intention to support on-site rather than feeing out. But the current structure, 23% of on-site affordable or 25% feeing out. As we all know, that will create, everyone will fee out, and you won't see a single additional affordable unit with those figures. And finally, with respect to existing projects, we agree that the increases need to apply. I would suggest that the matter be put over a few weeks. There has been, as Tess Wellborn noted, no communication with the community whatsoever about this major change to Divisadero. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Welch.
Calvin Welch, Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, a member of Affordable Divisadero, and we support the position of Affordable Divisadero that's been offered to you. I want to make a comment both about Mr. Connor's statement and about your staff's report. It is astounding to me that we can go through this almost a year-long discussion before this commission, with this commission playing a very involved role in the whole question of density bonus, and it's as if your staff wasn't informed by that conversation at all when applied to this particular case. The notion that you cannot get an additional density, affordable housing requirement by granting large density, of course, runs right into the face of the assumption of the density bonus program being proposed and devised by your own staff. So clearly, I mean, Proposition C was clear. This was pointed out to Supervisor Breed repeatedly, that there was no mythical prohibition of increasing the affordable housing fee, but the reluctance on the part of both staff and Supervisor Breed to do that in the initial case was unfortunate. To continue it by ignoring the clear request of the community for not only increased affordability for density, a policy adopted by this commission, by your staff, by this department, but to then ignore all of the data and information that you generated in the hearings that you had on density bonuses about the necessity of having not only affordability, enhanced affordability, but affordability able to be afforded at the neighborhood level. Not talked about at all in this legislation is any recognition that the Fillmore is one of the lowest income neighborhoods in San Francisco, that the average, according to the American census, U.S. Census, the median income of households in the Western Addition, African American households, is $29,000 a year, none of which can afford any of the supposed affordability levels projected in Supervisor Breed's legislation. It is critically important that this commission holds this legislation, informs your staff about the conclusions that you made in reference to the affordable density bonus program, and include those conclusions into your recommendations regarding this legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? Mr. Cohen.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Peter Cohen from Council of Community Housing Organizations. Staff has picked up on a couple of things that we'd flagged when we reviewed the ordinance. But just to reiterate the importance, the 23%, 25% relationship, I realize the recommendation is to simply change it to Prop C. You have to understand as you're going forward, there's a very intentional relationship between the percentage for on-site and the fee out, because you have to have some level of parity, otherwise you're essentially guiding a developer's choice. And right now we already have a fee that's too low. I'll say that on the record, the methodology means that the fee is low. We already have a built-in incentive to fee out. Most communities fight for on-site. But if you actually make those percentages closer, you're guaranteeing fee out. So I just want to point out that the original ordinance by no means incented on-site. It was just the opposite. The second thing, though, I want to point out is something staff, I think, I'm not quite clear if this is an error on my part or theirs. In the legislation that was in your staff report, there is an option for fee deferral. I see the language in there, unless it's been taken out, which I'd love to be corrected. I'm not clear why there is language in this ordinance to give a developer a choice to defer the fee payment time till after construction. It refers to a section of Section 415 that is now expired because that was put in there under a so-called stimulus program 4 years ago. If you're referring to an expired section of the code, there's no point of having legislation. So if that was just an oversight or cleanup, take it out. There should be no fee deferral option under this current market condition. And then thirdly, I think the fundamental question is, how do you recapture back the upzoning that occurred on these two corridors? That's where this all started, long before Prop C. And I will have to say that we brought to staff's attention in June 2015 that the memo, as it was called, existed. This was a memo from May 2013 that made quite clear that under the circumstances exactly that are happening for Divisadero and Fillmore, this would be grounds for increasing the inclusionary requirement. And unfortunately, staff missed that. So this is now a bit of catch-up on what could have been done in the original NCT upzoning. But as you try to level set with Prop C, I don't disagree with what you heard from the Affordable Divis folks. You still have to figure out how to recapture the upzoning itself that already happened prior to the new baseline of Prop C. I don't know what that amount is. The one example I'm thinking of is eastern neighborhoods, where you actually adopted a higher inclusionary based upon the level of upzoning. So we had so-called super inclusionary. There's 2 or 3 tiers above the baseline. Maybe that's what you want to do, is to recalibrate how you capture back some of that upzoning on Divisadero on top of the new baseline, so you can get that extra tier. I do think that's reasonable. That was the original purpose of this legislation, and it shouldn't be forgotten. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next public commenter.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is David Crozier with Genesis. I'm the developer of this project.
Which project, sir?
Pardon?
Which project?
400 Divisadero.
Thank you.
Thanks. Presently, you have a car wash and a gas station in the midst of a lot of parks, a lot of transit, a lot of retail, a lot of bike lanes. We want to do a good project and put housing over retail. I've had the privilege of doing other projects in the city and always try to do the best I can with design and working with folks. I've already met with a number of the local groups in the neighborhood, plan to continue doing so and be as accessible as possible. People have a lot of insights and opinions. It's always complicated doing a project in this city, but somehow we get there at the end. And one point of consensus is people seem to agree that you have this gap within this wonderful pedestrian and retail corridor, and it would be great to fill that in. How we do that seems to be the question here. One of the more creative ideas that several groups has told me that's not being addressed, and I don't have an opinion on it at this time, but it's interesting, is having like a menu type of approach where if you want to have this much affordability, you could go this high of a building and so forth. That has some complications in it. And I think the Planning Commission relative to this site has done a good job by removing the artificial density limits. Remember, the square footage stays the same. We don't build more square footage, but you give us the choice to divide that into smaller units, which makes it more affordable on the market rate side and provides more BMR units. And my request for the Commission is very simple. There's a lot of stuff for us to go through. Just treat us fairly, as is happening with the whole Prop C thing. There's a lot of uncertainties, but I think if people feel that you're looking at feasibility studies to make policy as opposed to arbitrary numbers, I think everyone's going to be comfortable with that. And I think that grandfathering is important because people who spend a lot of money to try to make a good project happen and filed their EEA at a certain time shouldn't be carved out. There shouldn't be discrimination. So we want to be team players. We want to do the best we can for the city, and we look forward to working with you in the coming months. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Steve Vettel for LeBron and Martel, also on behalf of Genesis Development, David's development company. As Connor mentioned, the amendments to the Divisadero Street NCT that were approved last year did remove the artificial density limits, but did not make any changes to the height limits, the rear yard requirements, the exposure requirements, so the square footage of projects stays the same. We don't disagree that the inclusionary housing obligation should be reexamined in light of that recent rezoning. For example, as Peter Cohen mentioned, in the eastern neighborhoods, when you created the UMU districts, you increased the inclusionary requirement from 12% to 14.4% for projects that didn't obtain a height limit increase. That was the range of increase in the eastern neighborhoods. There was no increase in other districts where NCD districts changed to NCT districts. So a couple of comments. First, the ordinance is not in sync with the Prop C trailing legislation. That trailing legislation recognizes that projects in the pipeline made land acquisition decisions based on the existing requirements, and that it's not fair to suddenly and dramatically increase those requirements midstream. Rather, projects are phased in. Pipeline projects are phased in under the trailing legislation. We'd recommend that a similar phase-in of these requirements be instituted here for pipeline projects. Second, the trailing legislation contains a detailed procedure for the city to conduct a feasibility analysis for the permanent set of inclusionary requirements. The feasibility report is to be done by July 30th of this year, after which you and the Board of Supervisors will use that analysis to set the permanent requirements going forward. Unfortunately, this ordinance does not acknowledge the feasibility analysis, and instead, in fact, on page 6 of the ordinance says no matter what the feasibility analysis results in, these rates can never go down. I was encouraged to hear Mr. Johnston say that they will look at that issue and try to merge this ordinance with the feasibility analysis when that comes out, and I think that's an encouraging step. I hope you'll recommend that they do that. It's unfortunate that your staff report did not even discuss the issue of feasibility. 23% of zero is zero affordable units if it's not feasible to build. So as I said, the problem here is that no one has performed a feasibility analysis of the levels proposed here, whether that's 23% or 25%, whether that's 30 or 33% offsite. Until that analysis is completed, it's premature to set any permanent rates in stone. For that reason, we are requesting that the Commission recommend either that this ordinance be continued until after completion of the feasibility study in July, or that language be added to the ordinance to state that the inclusionary levels in this ordinance will be revisited after completion of the feasibility analysis. The bottom line for David's project is that if the feasibility rates are not set correctly, this project will not go forward, that car wash and gas station will remain, and you won't have 150 units of new housing or any affordable housing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Jim Chappell, and I'm a part of the 400 Divisadero team advising on planning matters. This commission went through a very detailed process on the Prop C trailing legislation, being sure it was fair and equitable and treats like properties like. The legislation before you today singles out these two NCT districts and locks in the inclusionary percentage before the economic feasibility study is done, and does not include the same grandfathering provisions as the rest of the city. These areas and projects should be treated like everywhere else in the city. The NCT zoning does not increase the allowable square footage. It does not increase height. It does not increase bulk. It merely allows for smaller units, and then those units, therefore, will be more affordable. So the talk of massive upzoning is disingenuous at best. I ask that the Commission recommend to the Supervisor that this legislation regarding the NCT areas be amended to make the inclusionary requirements adjustable based on the feasibility study, just like everywhere else in the city, and it sounds like Supervisor Bree is agreeable to that. But it also, I ask that you recommend to the Commission that it have the same grandfathering provisions as the trailing legislation. If the reason that it doesn't have those same grandfathering regulations is that the claim that it's a massive upzoning, that simply is not the facts. It's just good planning. It's only fair and equitable. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tim Cullen on behalf of the Housing Action Coalition. I guess I'll try to keep it short and reiterate what Mr. Vettel and Mr. Chappell have said. We strongly supported the creation of the NCTs. That's good land use. It's a good direction to take the city, is to remove artificial density limits and reduce parking minimums. Make it that's a forward-thinking planning. That said, we are concerned about how this is going. The 23 and 25% levels, as you've heard repeatedly on all sides of the discussion, we're not sure where it came from or what methodology was used to establish it. And we think that it would benefit a lot, either make it an interim level subject to the economic feasibility study that's being conducted. It doesn't make sense that we're going to have a patchwork of neighborhoods with differing levels. Bring this under the process that was laboriously negotiated under Prop C. Let's get an economic feasibility study, look at it, and apply this to it. And we commend Supervisor Breed for considering that. And the grandfathering, that was a protracted battle, but it largely succeeded. And in the interest of fairness, to not change rules on projects in the middle of the stream, which is widely seen as unfair and worse, creates uncertainty for development, there was a rule set up with timelines, and we think that this would be entirely appropriate to apply to this. The NCTs are close. They're getting close to being great models to be replicated in many parts around the city. This one deserves your attention to make sure that you do it right, that the inclusionary is set fairly, and that the rules are set transparently so it'll move forward quickly. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment on this item? Okay, not seeing any Public comment is closed. Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, I think we need to look at this very closely because you're changing a law in midstream, which is something that I don't like to see happen because projects are brought forward under one set of laws, whether or not there should have been more affordability in connection with the height and bulk that was granted indeterminate density. You know, that was what was the case when the projects were planned and were designed. So we have a situation in eastern neighborhoods which does it a little more carefully. When they were passed, we had a series of tiers of increased affordability in relationship to how much we felt was given in various parts of the eastern neighborhoods. So they can range from 14.4 to up to 18, I believe, in some instances. So I think we have to look at that a little more graduated situation. And the same thing with the grandfathering situation. I mean, I think it looks as though even with the staff recommendation, the grandfathering is built in up to the 50% upgrade, in which case there's no grandfathering. So it's sort of an all or nothing type of situation, which, again, I don't think is the way to do it. If you're going to allow the grandfathering below 50% at these slightly increased levels, as is the case citywide, then probably for a larger project you could have a little bit more, but not a huge amount more, because it's the difference between 48% and 50% is not a huge difference. So I think we have to look at that carefully. And then there's also the state law, which we have to deal with anytime we're talking about this increase in height and bulk and increased affordability. The state law court case, Latinos Unidos, made the point that even if a sponsor built the requisite amount of affordable housing, they are entitled to an upgrade in market rate housing in return in terms of height and bulk. So eventually there will be some litigation in regards to this, I'm sure, because this has been going on for a long time and it's been state law and it has to be part of whatever the city is considering. And finally, I think Nexus study is essential. We went ahead with the proposal for Prop C without the Nexus study, only thinking about revising it after the Nexus study is, you know, after the election, is kind of vote on what we might have in the future rather than, you know, vote now and we may change it in the future based upon what we're going to learn. It's sort of like doing things backwards. We should take our study first and find out what is reasonable to expect, and then you have a vote on that. So anyway, I would like to see if there's a possibility to continue this, although I think there's probably a time frame that the supervisor has. Usually on this legislation, there's a certain amount of time that we have to comment on it. Maybe Mr. Ionon can comment on that, or Mr. Johnson. Is there a time frame during which our comments, our position can be made?
Connor Johnson, Legislative Aide to Board President Breed. The Latinos Unidos case is not particularly relevant here, I don't think. I'm not the attorney in the room, but we're not talking about an increase in height or bulk. The height or bulk controls remain the same. It's just the removal of the density control based on parcel square footage. With respect to the timeline, we have actually already introduced an extension for this to be heard later because the conversations around Prop C and the trailing ordinance were taking place. At some point, it needs to move through. And ultimately, what the legislation with the staff recommendation does is tie this to legislation that you have already seen and approved, which is the trailing legislation and this structure established in Prop C.
Thank you very much. And in regards to that, our position is only going to be a recommendation to the supervisor, so ultimately whatever we decide will have input, but our decision is not the final say on this.
Commissioner Hillis.
So I agree with most of the commenters that I think this needs kind of more time and more analysis. I think what I'm hearing the problem is kind of his Prop C has complicated this. I mean, we started discussing this. We heard from the neighborhood in the supervisor's office when the NCT was passed, and we realized there was some there was some value generated by making that change, and whether it's enormous or it's not enormous is yet to be, I think, in my mind, determined. Certainly, we've granted additional density. We didn't provide additional height, but I think we can get to that kind of number or that analysis fairly quickly. We've done it in eastern neighborhoods, as somebody mentioned, and we did increase. We took that kind of value difference and came up with fees or affordable housing increases that I think were a little more based on a feasibility analysis or analysis in the kind of the increase that we can do. And so I'm feeling like we're kind of mixing apples and oranges here when we're not just looking at the NCT and what that did to some of these projects. I mean, I know that the radiator shop project, we saw an increase not only in the units, but some increase in the square footage. But I think that's what we need to look at, and what the kind of the value increase to the land was in, like we did or we're looking at in West Soma, kind of what that may dictate as an increase in inclusionary, regardless of Prop C. And also Prop C is happening in a month, whether that's approved or not. If that's going to layer in complexity, let's do that analysis first of the NCT differential, see what that bears, and then kind of layer in the Prop C work or the outcomes of that after, and in fact they'll be known. But to me, this is kind of, we're taking the grandfathering from Prop C in the inclusionary from Prop C, but then we're saying, hey, if Prop C passes the difference we want because of the NCT, we need to study. I actually think we need to study that kind of the effect of the NCT now, and I think it's fairly simple to do, especially given that we have projects in the pipeline, and I think we can do that with the neighborhood and the project sponsors. But that would be, I don't feel like this is ready for us to make a recommendation on at this point.
Commissioner Richards.
So I'll give an analogy to what I believe Commissioner Hillis said. We're flying in a plane and it's got mechanical issues in midair. We know it can land. However, we're going to make the choice to repair it midair, which is going to distract us from our ability to make it land. And that's the danger I see here. I completely agree with what Commissioner Hillis said. I think we should do our work up front, wait to see what happens with Prop C. When we had the density bonus, this commission had 3 addendums that we added to our recommendation. We do a value recapture analysis. I think I heard people on both sides of the political spectrum say that was needed. We wanted to understand a survey of the existing conditions, if it involved any buildings that were historical. And then also the last one was community involvement. The key to any success of any plan really is letting the community get involved and understand what's happening and let them give their input. So, Mr. Johnson, you may differ with this, but I don't think I heard a lot of community involvement here either. So I don't think this is ready for us to give a recommendation on. I would support a continuance, and I would support a continuance if we had made on other issues until after the electors decide on what happens on June 7th.
Commissioner Wu.
Thanks. I'm supportive of that line of thinking. For me, it's not exactly like density bonus, a little bit more like Eastern neighborhoods. I think that's what you were saying. Maybe there's a way to come up with tiers that are related to the change in value conferred, essentially, and then to add whatever happens from Prop C on later. But first to determine what those tiers are, what the difference is, as you said, going from NCD to NCT. I think that issue about the deferral was important, so there is reference to deferral of fees in the language that should probably just be taken out. The grandfathering comparison is very confusing to me. This one is super different because it was only changed from NCD to NCT in September of 2015, right? And so, it's not that, prior to summer of 2015, we were operating in a different world, and then we switched to this world just very recently, and now we're sort of trying to correct for the mistakes that were not caught.
Would you mind if I have Mendika clarify this
Fee deferral.
fee deferral issue? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a
Okay.
misunderstanding.
So there's in our code sections right now, in section 415 and all of our fees, there is language that refers to the fee deferral option implemented by the building code. And that building code section is 107A 13.131. And if you read that code section, it has a sunset date actually for that deferral. So you would go to the building code, you would read that section, and you would see that sunsetted in July of 2013. And so we kept the planning code language in there, but sunset it in the building code. In case we ever wanted to bring fee deferral back to the planning code, we would only need to change the building code. But there is no fee deferral as of now. No one can defer their fees because if you go to the building code section that's referenced in the planning code, it is sunsetted. I can show you on the, if we have the internet.
No, I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
So that's standard for all.
It's standard for all. When you heard the child care impact fee, it was also in that code language. It's in all of our fees that we have that section that refers to that building code section that has sunsetted all of the fee deferral.
Okay. I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's just a choice whether or not to keep old language.
And
in
I
the
will,
code or
yeah,
not.
I will defer
Right.
to the project sponsor and you on that. So,
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Wu, for asking the question about fee deferral. It makes sense. I would err on the side of not including old language, and the only reason is because we've seen time and time again that we look at things 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years later, and things get really confusing for no reason. So if there's a sunset in the building code, I suggest that we keep it there and jump that bridge if we come to it of having to port new language to the planning code. So I also agree that for various reasons, this legislation seems great because it allows us to go back and actually take more advantage of the shift from NCD to NCT. But I agree with other commenters that we could have been provided a little more information to inform our decision about the specifics. And so, again, sort of echoing what Commissioner Hillis said, when we looked at the affordable housing density bonus legislation, there was a lot of work that staff did to model various model projects to show what we would get by adding on either state density bonus or a local density bonus program on top of existing zoning. And that was super helpful to us in terms of talking about the specifics of that legislation, and I feel like that is missing here. However, and I just want to mention one other commenter. I have a couple questions about the crossover between this legislation and Prop C and some other legislation, but I will just say, let me ask my questions first, then I'll get to my comments. So the first one is, we had a commenter come up and say, about talking about affordability in these particular neighborhoods. And I wanted to sort of make sure and ask the question that the recently passed neighborhood preference legislation would also apply to projects that were built in this area. So there is a little bit of that protection there, and we can have later discussions about whether or not the median AMI really applies to that neighborhood, but that neighborhood preference legislation does apply here.
Yes, the neighborhood preference legislation would apply to any project that has BMRs or affordable thermal. Yep.
Okay, excellent. And then I think a larger question I have, so my understanding from our discussion at the commission level about the 2016 Prop C is that one potential outcome of that ordinance passing and then the trailing legislation, or that ballot measure passing and then the trailing legislation, is that there's still the ability to have neighborhood level affordability levels. Is that sort of correct? So new Prop C establishes changes takes the inclusionary housing program out of the city charter and establishes new affordability levels. But my understanding is that even beyond the trailing legislation, taking it out of the city charter allows there to be different legislation in the future that could vary those affordability levels below the level of the entire city.
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne. I don't think we should get too much into a discussion of what Prop C is doing, but it's my understanding that you're correct. It does take it out of the charter. It establishes interim controls that will be in place until the board passes comprehensive legislation to establish new levels, which is what you're referring to as the trailing legislation. Then because that's done by ordinance, by the board, of course, the board can always amend it. It takes it out of having to be another ballot initiative, if that's what you were
I think so.
about. Okay.
So my intention here is not to get into a Prop C discussion. I think the only reason I say that is because I can be supportive of having an explicit linkage between this the levels established in this legislation and what comes out of the feasibility analysis that is proposed in the Prop C ballot. However, I guess I would, if we were to continue this, I want to preview it by saying that doesn't necessarily mean that the levels of affordability for this legislation have to match Prop C and the trailing legislation for Prop C. Because I think that would be a good precedent to sort of not start right off the bat with having different levels. But from my perspective, if we can show through the Nexus study that's already been completed, as well as the feasibility analysis that's called for, that there is a good reason to have different levels for these districts, I think I can be supportive of that, and that's just sort of looking forward. And again, I would be supportive of having a more explicit linkage to the feasibility analysis called for by the Prop C legislation. Thanks.
Commissioner Moore.
Just briefly, I am generally in support of a continuance. Support the majority of comments made by the other commissioners on the fee deferral option. I hope that we are not keeping it as a placeholder, but if it's expired, is it expired? If fee deferrals are considered under economic constraints, that is in itself a separate discussion. It's not an on and off switch, at least in my terms of reference. The other issue I am concerned about is to see, just from a timing and clarity point of view, the whole June vote goes through on its own as step one, setting baseline, and future tiered increases depending on increases in density become an independent discussion. How and how it doesn't apply here is a separate discussion. I believe that any increase in density requires a consideration. It is a degree to what, and that is all I want to say at this moment.
Commissioner Richards.
I move to continue the item to June 23rd.
Second.
Sorry, Commissioners, I will actually be out of town celebrating my dad's 75th birthday on June 23rd. So
30th is a more open calendar.
30th.
Still won't
June
be here,
30th.
so we could do a July set like
But
that.
we have a 90-day rule.
90 day. Can you? Sorry.
I can take care of it
Okay.
for a minute.
Move to continue to June 30th.
Second.
Well, why don't we keep to June 23rd if you're going to do it?
Well, your calendar is really June.
Okay. Okay.
As the seconder, I had a question. We also are advising that prior to that time that a feasibility study be undertaken and community meetings and staff recommendations, if that's okay with the
it is.
Maker of the motion, that would give us a little bit more, something more concrete to base our...
Commissioner, I don't think we'd have the capacity to do that in 4 weeks. I mean, there is a feasibility study going on that would be required as part of the legislation, as I understand it. No. But in 4 weeks, we would not have the results of a study.
If I could, suggest, I think it's more of an analysis between the NCD, from the NCD to the NCT. So it's not a full feasibility analysis.
That's right. That's my understanding. What the increased capacity would allow on this.
That's probably more appropriate, and that would be my second on that.
Okay. Commissioner Wu? Okay.
Very good, Commissioners. There's a motion that has been seconded.
Sorry, thank you, Commissioner. Just that would, June 30th or 23rd would still put us before the larger feasibility analysis, though, correct? Okay.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, that's correct. But I think what the commission is saying is that when we consider this on the 23rd or the 30th, that we would maybe make a suggestion that you look at the tie the feasibility analysis to the future legislation. I don't know that we're saying we have to have that before we look at this.
No, I thought we were asking for the difference between the NCD and the NCT, which is...
No, Mr. Johnston is referring to the feasibility study that's referenced in Prop C.
Well, that would, yeah, I mean, that would hopefully would come under that later.
Later, though.
Yeah, because
we would still hear this on June 30th, and then that would come later.
We'd know what would happen with Prop C by that time.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Commissioner Hillis?
Yeah, just to clarify, I mean, someone mentioned, eastern neighborhoods in the UMU, and where we did that change, there was kind of this tiered, and it rolled through, too, to Prop C. I think this is more analogous to that than to kind of what we're doing with Prop C.
If there's nothing further, then, Commissioners, there is a motion that has been seconded to continue this matter to June 30th to allow time for community meetings and a feasibility study between NCDs and NCTs. On that motion, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Wu.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 7-0. Commissioners, it'll place us on items 9A and B for the Academy of Art University informational update and case number 2008.0586E for the Academy of Art existing sites technical memorandum. And for any persons who might be here in the audience for items 10A and B for 2000 through 2070 Bryant Street conditional use authorization and large project authorization, those matters have been continued to June 2nd.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tina Chang, Planning Department staff. As a follow-up to the informational hearings held regarding AAU on October 1st, 2015, and most recently on March 17th, 2016, staff would like to provide a few updates on the following issues: enforcement, processing approaches, and policy recommendations. After going over the department's policy recommendations, which will provide rationale for supporting or recommending disapproval of projects, I will go over each of the projects that staff is not supportive of. Regarding enforcement, as of April 14th, the zoning administrator has issued notice of violation and penalty decisions to the Academy of Art University for 22 properties in violation of the Planning Code, all of which have been appealed by AAU to the Board of Appeals. The items are currently scheduled for a hearing on June 22nd, 2016. The decisions included a deadline to publish a response to comments for the EIR and ESTM, or existing sites technical memorandum, which you'll hear about shortly from my colleague Chelsea Fordham. Failure to publish these environmental documents by July 1st will result in penalties of $250 per day per property or $5,500 per day for all 22 properties. In addition to the aforementioned potential penalties, penalties have continued to accrue on 460 Townsend, totaling approximately $500,000. AAU also has outstanding penalties of $3,250 at 2295 Taylor Street. In all, AAU has paid approximately $81,500 in enforcement-related fees on permits with outstanding violations. Based on feedback from the Commission and additional analysis, staff has reorganized the properties and their uses into 7 policy categories. We plan to group the projects for the Commission's consideration by the policy categories over the course of approximately 6 to 7 hearings. Since properties of the same land use share similar qualities, issues, and concerns, staff would group said projects together under one presentation while preparing separate motions for each property. So, for example, all projects related to the loss of housing would be grouped together under one presentation, followed by separate motions for each property. In addition to the 19 properties requiring conditional use authorization or planning code amendments, some of the 15 properties that typically would not require Planning Commission action, such as those requiring only historic preservation review or building permit applications, may be brought before the Planning Commission through a staff-initiated DR to impose conditions of approval related to transportation, historic preservation review, or as staff finds appropriate for a property on a case-by-case basis. Regarding 9 properties requiring planning code amendments, AAU requires code amendments on 9 properties. 2 planning code amendment applications have been submitted by AAU. One application proposes to amend Section 317 to allow the conversion of residential uses to student housing for 7 of AAU sites. The second proposes to amend Section 175.5 to extend the grace period for legalizing non-conforming uses in the Sally District. Staff proposes alternative ordinances that align with the department's larger policy recommendations to the ordinance proposed by AAU. At the initiation hearing tentatively scheduled to coincide with the EIR certification date for the amendments, staff would present both ordinance proposed by the project sponsor as well as the ordinance prepared by the planning department. The Planning Commission could choose to initiate 1 ordinance, 2 ordinances, or none of the proposed ordinances for each application. Can we get there we go. The timeline that you see before you is identical to the one in your case packets. In general, the final ESTM and responses to comments for the DEIR would be published by July 1st. At the end of July, staff would bring before the Commission for consideration both the initiation of planning code amendments and the certification of the final EIR. After the August recess in September, staff plans to bring the adoption of the planning code amendments for the Commission's consideration, as well as the first set of entitlements. Staff intends to continue processing entitlements through the fall and winter of this year. As mentioned, staff has grouped AAU's properties according to the following policy categories. Regarding the conversion of housing to student housing, the department is inclined to be unsupportive of conversions that detract from the citywide goal to protect the affordability of San Francisco's housing stock and the policy to require institutions to meet the housing demand they generate with new housing. We would be inclined to support cases where the conversion of student housing serves as a higher intensity use than would otherwise be located on the subject site. For example, there are several properties in RC districts where the last legal use is a very low-density residential building. If left to the free market, due to the fact that properties are historic resources in most cases, the structure would most likely result in a single-family dwelling or at most 3-family dwelling. Staff finds that the properties being occupied as student housing serves as a higher intensity use than it otherwise would be. Regarding the conversion of industrial to institutional uses, staff is inclined to be unsupportive of conversions that detract from the citywide goal to preserve PDR space, and support cases where the conversion of institutional use maintains the industrial use in nature. Regarding the conversion of retail to institutional uses, the department is inclined to be unsupportive of conversions that detract from the stated citywide goal to provide active ground floor uses. We would support cases where the institutional use maintains a publicly accessible active use and is therefore best situated on the subject site rather than elsewhere in the city. Conversion of office to institutional uses, the department is inclined to be unsupportive of unauthorized conversions where the proposed use is incompatible with the surrounding context or...
Gina, could you, excuse me just for 1 second, could you just slow down just a little? You're kind of reading kind of fast.
Sure.
So, thank you.
No problem. Regarding the conversion of retail uses to institutional uses, the department would be unsupportive of conversions that would detract or take away from active ground floor uses, and be supportive of conversions that maintains a publicly accessible use. For office uses, we would be unsupportive of conversions of office space to institutional uses that are incompatible with the neighborhood context, or they're located away from the AAU central core, requiring the shuttle service to be overextended. We would support conversions where the office use is institutional in nature, such as the institution's administrative headquarters, for example, and is appropriate for the subject site. Regarding the last 3 policy categories, staff was generally supportive of the conversions of tourist hotel and motel to student housing, religious institutional uses to post-secondary institutional uses on sites, and sites with no changes of uses. Staff finds these supportable in that AAU has converted these uses to become a higher intensity use than would otherwise be located on site, or they've adaptively reused a historically significant building in a manner that is consistent with the neighborhood context. Should these uses change in manner where these conditions do not apply, the department would be inclined to change our recommendation. Your case reports have all 34 properties requiring discretionary action either by the department or planning commission. In summary, staff is inclined to recommend approval for 21 of the 34 properties and be unsupportive of 11. Staff has not rendered a recommendation for 2 of the properties in light of new information currently under review. In interest of saving time, only properties where staff is inclined to recommend disapproval will be highlighted. To reiterate, these recommendations are preliminary based on the most recent information found or made available to staff. Our recommendations are subject to change in light of new information. The legend here is also identical to the ones included in your packets. The following slides will contain colored banners across the top. The blue represents projects that are not currently permitted by planning code. Orange represents those requiring conditional use authorization. Yellow, those requiring historic preservation review. And green, only those requiring building permits. And the requirement is the highest required, so a planning code amendment could also require conditional use authorization, historic preservation review, and building permit. This map shows a snapshot of the department's recommendation on all AAU sites. Sites in green are those where the department is inclined to be supportive of. Red, where we're inclined to recommend disapproval. In gray, there are properties with no apparent violations. And black are the properties where staff the recommendation is pending. Starting with the conversion of housing to student housing, again as a quick snapshot, staff is inclined to recommend approval on 3 of the 7 sites. We're inclined to recommend disapproval for the following 4 sites because we find that the conversion detracts from the city's goal to protect the affordability of the city's housing stock and the requirement for institutions to meet housing demand as they generate with new housing. To legalize each of the following 4 properties, each require a planning code amendment to allow group housing. Each of the 4 properties would require a planning code amendment to the group housing portion of the property, conditional use authorization to allow group housing in RC or RM4 zoning districts, historic preservation review, and a building permit application. 1080 Bush was legally a property containing 42 dwelling units and 15 residential hotel rooms. This building has been converted to be entirely student housing. The property is a historic resource located in an RC4 district at Bush and Leavenworth in the Nob Hill neighborhood. (1153) Bush was legally a property containing 1 dwelling unit and 14 1153 Bush was legally a property containing 1 dwelling unit and 14 residential hotel rooms and is now student housing. The property is a historic resource located in RC4 zoning district at Bush and Leavenworth in the Civic Center neighborhood. (1055) Pine was legally a residential hotel containing 59 rooms. It now contains 81 student housing rooms. The property is a historic resource located in the RM4 zoning district within the Nob Hill SUD. And finally, 860 Sutter Street was legally a tourist and residential hotel containing 39 tourist rooms and 50 residential hotel rooms. Again, the building is now student housing. It's a historic resource and it's located in the Civic Center neighborhood. All of these properties would require, again, planning code amendments, conditional use authorization, historic preservation, and building permits. Moving to industrial sites, as you can see from the map, staff is inclined to recommend disapproval of 1 site and has not rendered a decision on the remaining 2. The property at 2225 Gerald Avenue was previously used as an industrial warehouse. It's currently being studied in the EIR and is being used as storage and accessory office. The Academy has expressed desire to use the site as recreational use, admin office, and storage, which the department is inclined to be unsupportive of. However, the Academy has submitted a revised application under review to provide a community facility which is principally permitted in the PDR zoning district. The department is open to supporting a code-compliant option. To legalize the site as an institutional use, a legislative amendment to Section 210.3 would be required. The next 2 properties at 466 and 460 Townsend are properties that were legally industrial uses. They were previously known to contain industrial art spaces. Both properties are located in the Western Soma mixed-use office zoning district, which principally permits industrial uses. Staff was generally supportive of uses that remained code compliant in nature. However, it recently came to light that non-industrial uses are now located on site. Staff is currently reviewing information on the property for both of these properties. It should be noted that an interim moratorium has been imposed on the conversion of PDR uses. Accordingly, conversion of industrial to non-PDR uses is prohibited until interim controls are lifted. The interim moratorium expires on November 3rd, 2016. If permanent controls prohibit conversions of PDR uses, a planning code amendment would be required. For the properties converting office to institutional uses, staff was inclined to recommend disapproval of 4 of the 7 sites. Generally, staff was inclined to recommend disapproval of the unauthorized conversions, especially since the sites were located a greater distance from AAU's central core. For 601 Brannan Street, it's located in the Sally District, which does not permit institutional uses. A grandfathering provision was included in the rezoning, allowing non-conforming uses to legalize within 3 years. This grace period expired on April 27th of this year. To legalize, a planning code amendment would be required. AAU has submitted a planning code amendment to amend section 175.5, extending the legalization grace period from 36 to 48 months. As mentioned earlier, staff will present proposed ordinance before the Commission's consideration for this property as well as the residential conversions in July for the Commission's consideration. The next property at 700 Montgomery is located in the Jackson Square Special Use District in the C2 zoning district. To legalize, conditional use authorization is required. Again, we're generally unsupportive because of its distance away from the central core and its compatibility with the overall district. 58 to 60 Federal Street is located in the MUO zoning district. This project requires historic preservation review, a building permit, and under normal circumstances wouldn't require planning commission action. Again, it's located away from the central core. 2340 Stockton is located in a C2 zoning district within the Waterfront 2 special use district. The previous use was office, and it requires a building permit. Staff is inclined to recommend disapproval for similar reasons. The final land use policy category we'll go over today is a conversion of retail to institutional uses. Staff is inclined to be unsupportive of conversions that detract from the stated citywide goal to provide active ground floor retail uses in commercial districts. 2295 Taylor is located in the North Beach NCD within the North Beach Special Use District. The property would require conditional use authorization for use size and to reestablish parking on the second floor. Additionally, historic preservation review and building permits would be required. And last but not least is 2801 Leavenworth. This is a historic resource located in the C2 zoning district requiring historic preservation review and building permit applications. Staff would prefer active ground floor retail uses in our commercial districts. I know that was a lot of information just presented before the Commission. As indicated in your staff reports, staff would like Commission feedback on staff's policy recommendations, our processing approaches, and preliminary recommendations. This concludes staff's presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Opening up for public comment.
Commissioner Fong, we are going to continue with the existing sites technical memorandum.
Thank you very
much. And then
much.
accept public comment.
Thank you.
On both items.
Is that going to pull up in a minute, Jonas? Okay. Good afternoon, President Fong and members of the Planning Commission. I am Chelsea Fordham, Planning Department staff and coordinator for the Academy of Art Existing Sites Technical Memorandum, or AAU ESTM. Also joining me is Rick Cooper, Senior Environmental Planner, and Brett Bollinger, Transportation Planner. Also joining me is Shelley Caltagirone, who will be providing you a synopsis of yesterday's Historic Preservation Commission hearing on the ESTM. Members of the project sponsor team are also present and will be providing you with a brief presentation following this presentation. The item before you is public review and comment on the AAU draft ESTM. The draft ESTM was published on May 4, 2016, and the 30-day review period closes on June 3rd. Due to the fact that projects are evaluated under CEQA from the existing conditions at the time of publication of the NOP, past actions, even if they occurred without obtaining the necessary permits, are considered existing conditions. Therefore, the ESTM provides the analysis of these past actions. The AAU draft ESTM examines the environmental impacts of past non-permitted work of 34 of 40 AAU properties and recommends conditions of approval to remedy those impacts. As a reminder, 6 sites were evaluated in the draft EIR. Out of the 34 existing sites, 28 require discretionary approvals, 4 require changes of use, and physical work performed without the benefit of permits. The ESTM analyzes the combined effects of all 34 existing sites, as well as the individual environmental effects of the 28 sites requiring discretionary approvals. The draft ESTM is different from a typical environmental review document in that the recommended conditions of approval will not become a requirement unless the Planning Commission chooses to adopt those conditions as part of any future conditional use, building permit, or any other approval. Additionally, the draft ESTM contains a transportation demand management program for all of its 40 properties and for future occupied properties. The discussion of each existing site will be provided back to the Commission in subsequent staff reports on all conditional use and entitlement applications. Examples of the proposed conditions of approval include: for typical historic preservation conditions of approval, things include removal of illegal signs and replacement with Secretary of the Interior standards compliant signs, removal or replacement of awnings, removal of illegally installed aluminum or vinyl windows, and approving minor scopes of work such as security gates and grills. Typical transportation demand management conditions of approval include removing unused shuttle bus zones, relocation to appropriate location for bicycle parking, and provide bicycle parking to meet AAU's demand, to monitor pedestrian conditions around entrances and onto shuttle bus loading areas, and relocating all flag stops, which are primarily stops where double parking is occurring. Staff is recommending commenters focus their review on topics such as consistency of AAU's existing site descriptions, the appropriateness of these conditions of approval, accuracy of the environmental impact analysis for the existing sites, and the draft transportation management plan. I would also like to remind speakers that this is not a hearing to consider the approval or disapprovals of the project. The approvals will follow the final EIR certification hearing. Your comments today should be confined to the adequacy and accuracy of information and analysis contained in the draft ESTM. I would also like to request that speakers speak slowly and clearly so that the court reporter here today can create an accurate transcript. And also commenters should state their name and addresses so they can be properly identified and we can provide them with the final ESTM. For those interested in commenting on the draft ESTM in writing or by mail or email, they can submit their comments to the Environmental Review Officer by 5 p.m. June 3rd. Additionally, I would like to remind the Commission that we will be returning in July for the Commission to consider certification of the final EIR and review of the final ESTM. If the final EIR is certified, the Planning Commission may consider all required AAU approvals. This concludes my presentation. Unless the Commissioners have questions, I would like Shelley Caltagirone to summarize the Historic Preservation Commission meeting yesterday on the ESTM.
Hello, Commissioners. Shelley Caltagirone from the Preservation staff of the Planning Department. My comments will be brief. As Chelsea noted, the Historic Preservation Commission heard the ESTM yesterday and made comment. There was generally unanimous agreement on the accuracy, thoroughness, and consistency of the ESTM studies. Commissioner Johns did note that the history of 860 Sutter Street could be improved by researching that site's history as a residential club. Commissioner Hawes did ask the project sponsor to keep up the momentum in pursuing the legalization of their project sites. And that concluded their comments. I would like to note that 10 of the project sites will be going before the Historic Preservation Commission for various legalization approvals for either certificates of appropriateness or permits to alter. And I'd also like to note that Commissioner Highland was absent and Commissioner Wolfram had to recuse himself. I'm available for any questions you have about the preservation studies in the ESTM.
Okay, thank you. Director Ram.
Thank you, Commissioners. Just to wrap up the staff presentation, I just first of all want to thank staff for putting together this amazing body of work. I mean, Chelsea, on the ESTM, this is the first time we've ever done a report like this. It's essentially an EIR that's not an EIR, if I could call it that. And also Tina for putting together this great staff report, which I think is really well lays out the staff's ideas, thoughts, recommendations to you. On that point, and also Shelley on this, and Shelley on the preservation stuff, because this is a lot of projects coming at everyone at once in a kind of package, so I really appreciate staff's work. With respect to Tina's presentation, I just want to summarize kind of what we're asking you for today, the type of feedback. On pages 3 and 4 of the report are kind of our thoughts on the policy recommendations, on why we've recommended what we have on these various projects. So there's a series of policy directions or recommendations, or the policy basis for our recommendations, I should say. So that's one thing that we would like just some preliminary thoughts from you on, if that's the right basis for our recommendations. And then the second, of course, is the actual recommendations on the properties. The properties that Tina highlighted in her presentation, as she pointed out, are the ones that we are recommending disapproval on. So we are recommending a preliminary basis, and again, these are preliminary recommendations. We will make our final recommendations down the road when the actual projects come to you. But the way, in sum, what we are recommending is that of the 34 properties, we would be currently inclined to be unsupportive of 11 of them, based on those policy recommendations and the basis that we point out on pages 3 and 4 of the report. So 11 of the 34, we would, in our current thinking, recommend preliminarily being unsupportive of those sites. So just to sum up what we'd be asking you to look, asking for your feedback at this point and for future meetings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now opening it up to public comment, Zane Grisham, Sue Hester.
The Academy wanted to.
Is that Zane, right? Zane, you're with the Academy?
Yes.
Or representing the Academy? Yes. Okay, great.
If I might provide.
You can put it right there on the braille.
And I understand that I have 10 minutes. Is that correct? Thank you. Bring up the PowerPoint. Very good. President Fong, members of the Commission, Director Ram, I'm Zane Gresham of Morrison & Forster. Pleased to be here today to represent the Academy of Art University. It has been a long time coming, but now we have an opportunity to actually discuss the entire project and the project sponsor. The project sponsor is, of course, the Academy of Art University. It was established in 1929 right here in San Francisco to train and employ working artists in San Francisco, with 2,000 on-site arts and design faculty and staff and about 8,700 students, 45% from the Bay Area, over 50% from California. It is a fully accredited, it has participated greatly in the life of the community, as you can see from this slide, and it is, in fact, a fully accredited art and design university. You can see the number of accreditations it has. The first one is, in fact, the accrediting body for most colleges and universities.
Mr. Gresham, I don't think...
For you, Sue?
It's hard to hear.
Yes, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, folks, thank you very much.
All right. It has 30 courses of study spanning everything from architecture to photography and motion pictures. It even has its own intercollegiate sports teams, some of which are quite successful, particularly the women's basketball team. Go ahead, next. It has outstanding students, outstanding students, alumni, and faculty. And I won't go over them, but some of them are the Global Creative Director at Yahoo, the winner of the first prize at the 2015 Student Academy Awards, and one of the 5 designers to watch as identified by Forbes. You know, truly, they're making their name for themselves and for the Academy. In addition, there are awards and accolades in areas like film, automotive design, graphic and industrial design, and fashion. This is all done in the context of an urban campus, not a suburban campus, not something that was granted land in the last century to build out over rolling fields. It's woven into the fabric of the city as it has been from the beginning. And it's similar to other urban universities. In discussions about that point, I've heard from a number of people that it reminds them of the way that NYU is placed in different parts of New York City, and particularly in Manhattan, as opposed to the standard way that many of us associate with a large campus located in a suburban area. It's been a steward of historic buildings. You notice it was interesting. Many of these buildings were acquired by the Academy, and they have been preserved and kept intact because the Academy acquired them when they were disused, when they were damaged or in disrepair. And a great example of that is at St. Bridget, where millions of dollars were spent to upgrade the seismic capacity of that building, and also to restore the great stained glass in that area right before it was pretty close to being lost altogether. In addition, it provides a thoughtful adjunct to the transportation that the city itself provides through Muni. In fact, Muni is a primary way that the students get around. Another way is through the campus shuttle system, which has been upgraded and according to city staff, is in fact improved significantly. So that's a little bit about the Academy. Let's talk a little bit about the project. What is the project? The project is really entitlements for existing educational facilities continue the academic mission. It is most distinctively not a building-by-building review of what might happen to one building or another building. It's really consideration, and in fact, that's the way it's been portrayed, both in the ESTM and in the EIR. The Academy of Art University project is a description of all of these activities. The approvals for educational facilities, you know, are going to be considered at an appropriate time by you. And you can see the kinds of uses. They're all standard, traditional academic institution uses. In addition, we're seeking approvals for student housing, another element that is integral to the operation of universities and colleges. In fact, the Academy of Art University operates 1,800 beds, and if authorized, could accommodate 20% of all on-site students, consistent with, I think, the directive that the actual directive of the general plan. And 2/3 of them are clustered very close together on Sutter Street and Union Square, and sharing lounges and other and student dining facilities. But you know, in this city, as we know, you don't just have a project that's presented without offering public benefits. And we wanted to highlight now the public benefits that the Academy has offered already, and we wish to communicate them publicly to you at this time. And you'll see the areas in which those benefits fall. Let me review them one at a time. In housing, the Academy would set aside an entire dormitory for long-term affordable housing, not student housing, long-term affordable housing. It would create more student housing by converting an existing tourist hotel to student housing. It would construct a new dormitory on an underutilized site next to existing student housing and would meet all future student housing needs by adding to San Francisco's housing stock. It would also make payments to the city, a total of $10 million in impact fees for housing, transportation, parks, and other public benefits. It also would be implementing conditions of approval and mitigation measures. These are the ones that have been generally suggested or outlined at in the EIR and the ESTM, but remain obviously to be further developed and refined with the planning staff in a real dialogue and ultimately adopted by the Planning Commission. And how do we protect the city's interest in seeing that these benefits are provided? We through the use of a development agreement, common device used to ensure that the obligations of a developer are in fact performed and the benefits to be conferred on the owner of the property, in this case the Academy, will be honored. That would come about by approval by the Planning Commission of all of these terms and conditions. It would have to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. There would have to be a complete policy review and consideration. And it would have to be done with the advice from the City Attorney's Office, because after all, this would be a major undertaking and agreement. But it would be guided in the first instance by the Planning Department and Commission. You know, closing out you close in on this and you say, well, then what happens if the Academy does not behave? What happens is that the Academy has proposed a strong enforcement measure that would include negotiating a complaint and agreeing to a stipulated judgment. For those people, non-lawyers, that means an agreed-upon judgment. That would then be in the hands of the city, and at the determination of the Planning Commission that the Academy is not complying with the terms of the development agreement, could be filed in court. That would provide strong assurance of performance, much stronger than anything in the planning code, or even a lawsuit could provide. Now, looking to the future, the Academy wants a practical resolution that's beneficial to all. We think the ESTM and EIR create a foundation for constructive dialogue. We want to work with your direction, with the Planning Department and other city agencies on a package of entitlements and benefits for the whole project, like other projects. And we look forward to that opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and appreciate having representation from AAU. Opening up to public comment, Sue Hester, Chris Schaefer, Rose H., I'm guessing Hilton. I think it's Maggie A., Spike Khan, Magic, and Marie Eliza, and Marie Sorensen.
Sue Hester, this is going to be a supplement to my written comments. We've been dealing with Academy of Art as a city since they were out of compliance in 1990, and this is what they say is their sphere of influence. They're interested in acquiring new buildings, but it should be looked at. So there's 6 buildings on here, but the reality of what the city is dealing with is not only the 6 buildings were on the previous sheet, but that agglomeration of residential and institutional buildings. Academy has been required to file an IMP since 1990. If they had filed an IMP in an appropriate time period, we would not be here today, because there would have been commission consideration of this mass right here. That is Lower Nob Hill, the Upper Tenderloin. That is where you can see visually the greatest concentration of residences are. What is that neighborhood? And it's a neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that has historically had a lot of working class housing. It was residential hotels that had dining rooms in them, as well as apartment buildings. And what we have had is a decimation of a neighborhood. Some of it comes through in the ESTM, some of it doesn't. What we need to have is direction from this commission on how to deal with housing, first of all. We need to say they must build housing. That is what the Planning Commission would have done at any point had the IMP been filed since 1990. In 1990, they had on-site enrollment of 1,700 students. In current days, they have 8,649. They've increased 500% without any direction from the city about how they deal with the increased housing load and the increased campus. What you should do is require them to build housing. I disagree strongly with one of the parts of the staff recommendation. They say you can keep 150 Hayes as an administrative building. That is a site surrounded by housing. Housing tower has been approved by the city, and a conservatory music is coming in with another one. That site, which is AAA number 3, should be absolutely housing. It's appropriate, and we got to keep a lot of their housing. Other people will talk about other aspects of this, but the big thing you need to take home is that it decimated a neighborhood, and we need housing back. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Chris Schaefer. I'm actually a resident of University Terrace, which is totally surrounded by the University of San Francisco. And as a neighbor, I ended up becoming an expert in academic institutional master plan, even though I didn't plan to do that for part of my life. What I can say in contrast to how USF has handled the institutional master plan and the Academy of Art is I feel totally insulted as a resident of San Francisco by such a bad actor. USF, and so let's take a look at that holistic plan that the attorney suggested that AAU is working on. First of all, housing should never have been taken away from residents. A student is not a permanent resident of San Francisco. University of San Francisco builds dormitories, is currently planning a 635 house bed dormitory on its campus, and has figured out how to get that funded. The universities should build housing and not take away that stock from us as residents. Secondly, in their holistic approach, even if you take a look at recreation, and this group has seen me talk about recreation, the Academy of Art uses 22 facilities, mostly public, some private, to provide its own recreation. And I don't know what that one little teeny community center is going to do for those award-winning teams that AAU has. The third is the issue of transportation. Everyone should have a traffic demand management program. Every student should have a fast pass. They should be on Muni, and not having those vans double parked on Townsend Street or any other place in the city where we have to crawl around those vans on a street that's got biking and the students aren't using the bikes. This is not, and I really urge you, commissioners, to ask for a holistic solution where everybody ends up being a good actor. Universities are a very large part of our fabric, and we need to have them perform in a way that is consistent with the citizens here of San Francisco. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. I've spoken about this before and talked about how I, as a landlord, get fined every time I do a violation. And in fact, one of my tenants who owed some money to taxes had a sheriff in the restaurant collecting from the till every time a plate got sold. So I don't know why we have not enforced these laws and these fines. And with that money, we could be building a lot more housing, and to allow this university to not only take SROs and convert them illegally and residential housing and convert them illegally, and allow them to keep doing this, not fine them, not collect those fines. I just feel, again, I shouldn't even have to then pay that business tax that is due on the 31st. If they can get away with murder, I don't know why the whole city doesn't. And just none of us pay what we're supposed to if that's what we're getting the message from you guys. So once again, please, they're not kidding about those buses. I ride a bicycle and they're a menace out there. You're talking about environmental consequences. What are those idling buses and all those private little shuttles going back and forth, clogging up the streets? There's so many reasons for you to crack down on this school, and this has been going on since the 90s. I just don't even get it. So please do what you can. You are our public servants to protect the public, so please do so.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. After a long hiatus, I am back on this topic. Glad to see you all. The existing site's technical memorandum talks about units of housing that are smaller than the demand, but actually the ESTM does not state what bucket of AMI the residents fell into. So the data is missing in this regard in the ESTM. The ESTM also talks about an increase in housing demand and reduction in housing supply, displacement of all these people. What has the city asked AAU to help out with the shortfall of the units? The for-profit school is not building housing that has been determined in this ESTM as needed for future populations. Other nonprofits and schools are helping to build housing and accommodating. They have institutional master plans and other arrangements to accommodate the increased enrollment. In terms of CEQA, currently, it's vehicle level of service, but it's going to this vehicle miles traveled. What is the total number of miles traveled by the AAU shuttles for each location in total? And maybe some of these routes have fewer ridership and they should be discontinued because in the report it talks about the excess nitrous oxide emissions exceeding Bay Area air quality management standards. Planning Code Section 166 for car share does not apply to non-residential buildings and mixed-use and transit-oriented residential districts. AAU students and residents with vehicles are putting pressure on neighboring residential parking. What has AAU done with community responsibility to be aligned with the Transportation Sustainability Program, and planning needs to work with SFMTA, AAU, and other agencies to solve this problem? Let's gather a bit more data for the ESTM and incorporate them, put them in the findings in the upcoming EIR that's due in July 2016. And I've had this less than 150-word summary for the minutes for the Sunshine Ordinance, and it shows exactly what I just talked about. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, and another card, Joan Holden.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Magic. Thank you for hearing me today. I just also would like to ask the clerk to refer to us as the public, not the audience. It seems to be endemic that every public meeting I go to, we get referred to as the audience, which is a completely disempowering statement. So I would appreciate that changed. So I'm not up to snuff as I usually am on such issues, but maybe my naivete will be to an advantage today, because what I'm hearing is that they've totally broken the law. They've taken over affordable housing and SROs that we need, and now the fines aren't being collected, and now they're supposed to be able to go back as bad actors and now have a chance to approve everything that they already did illegally. Is that the case? Because, wow, an average citizen couldn't do that. I'm glad that the Historic Preservation Society is looking at this. I think that, City College is having trouble with accreditation, and they've been an incredible public service. And somehow this college, which is breaking the law left and right and not being fined, is being able to go forward and try to make up for what they knew was illegal in the first place. They could not have not known that they were taking away from our pool of affordable housing that we need desperately in this city. It's just an odd thing, that we have affordable housing, and then we have, I guess, what we would call unaffordable housing. I mean, what kind of society do we live in? I just talked to 5 police officers outside, and all of them used to live in the city, and they were just talking about how they can't find a place to live in this city. Some of them were natives. This is what we're dealing with. And so the Academy of Science can present itself as a high standard institution and then steal these so needed rooms and houses in the Tenderloin, and then we say, okay, let's all review this and spend public time trying to make it work for them, and maybe we'll give them some and fine them a little. No, they should never be able to break the law and then go back and have another chance when they haven't even taken care of it, and the public has been saying this for ages. It's just plain wrong. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I have some letters here that I'm going to hand you. I just want to mention a few things. It seems like I've been here at least 2 or 3 times on this one issue. I believe that we have a problem with enforcement. Some people have to obey the laws and other people don't. Some people are punished and others aren't. We now have a situation where I guess they're thinking that, well, we're going to sign a development agreement and then we'll start obeying the laws and then we'll start paying the fees and fines that we'll negotiate with you. That sounds rather strange to me. I don't believe too many other institutions or private individuals would even consider making that kind of a statement. It just seems a bit out of hand. So that's the kind of issues that the public has to deal with when it comes to this kind of situation. We're hoping that as commissioners, you will take this sort of situation into consideration and really possibly if there's some buildings that they have taken and not done anything wrong with, allow those to continue, but stop whatever's going on with the illegal use. I did want to thank the enforcement officers because I think a lot of work has been done since we started complaining about lack of enforcement in general. As far as I'm aware at least, there's been new money that's gone into hiring new people to work on this. So I think as a general rule, that is going forward in a very reasonable fashion, somewhat. But when it comes to something this big and this ridiculous, has been going on for this long, to just all of a sudden say, oh, it's okay, these people have been using industrial PDR space illegally, but we're just going to prove it, you know, we're going to let it go because what can we do? They're too big for us to fight. The same thing happened with a building in my neighborhood not too long ago. I understand what was formerly the Correct building was allowed to proceed as office space because it was all, of course, originally the Correct building. It was all factory and it was all industrial. And it's supposed to be all PDR, but, oh, that's okay, we're just going to let it go. There's still PDR in the bottom floor, I'm quite sure, because I live nearby and I see it all the time. So hopefully we'll keep what's there still and not let that go, by the way, either. But these are the kind of issues that are really driving a lot of public dissatisfaction. It's not your fault, I'm not blaming you, with the city government. And I believe that you're going to see some changes coming down pretty soon if we don't start to give the public a little more respect. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Marie Sorensen, and I guess the rule of thumb is the bigger you are, the sleazier you can act. I want to thank the planning for the report, but why did it take so long? Academy of Art is an insult to every taxpayer, homeowner, business owner, renter, everybody of San Francisco, people who have always followed the rules. Why is that? Academy of Art never has. They just operate. And you heard him, future compliance? Well, I guess we'll have the city can go after us. Well, how about right now? They have been not compliant for so many years. They just operate. They operate above everybody else. They don't have to follow the rules because, after all, they're the Academy of Art. We have a Google winner, and we have this and we have that. It's just a school, and it's a for-profit school. They're making millions of dollars. And let's talk about the buildings that they are housing people. How many people got evicted so they could put their students in? I think that's probably there probably have been a lot of people. How about, I'm a homeowner. I share a home with two other people. We do projects. We have to get continuances. We have to get new permits. We have to pay every time somebody comes over to look at something only to turn us down because, they have a bad day. I don't understand why normal people don't get the same consideration Academy of Art's been given all these years. We struggle. And Academy of Art seems like they've been given a free pass for so long, they don't even care anymore. Thank you. Hold their feet to the fire.
Okay, John Burtis.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is John Bardis. I'm very interested to comment on the missing information that's not before you in this informational hearing. I'm very concerned about what we have as an array of data that tells a great deal about the properties, but there's one thing that's missing, and that is who owns these properties? What is the name of the property owner for these properties? And I have seen in the past that the owner is not Academy of Art. And yet Academy of Art is having these properties to use for student housing. So if the owner is a private owner, that means the private owner was able to acquire the properties from the previous owner based on income flow that came through the properties that was really depressed by the fact that we had rent control, and rent control units had an income flow that was lower than would have been if they had been vacant and market. Now you have an owner who then turns around and gives this to the institution to basically and the institution does some things where maybe the properties get vacated. At that point, they go to market. At that point, the institution at market rents per bed, as opposed to what was being rented per unit. You're talking about a 400 or 500% increase in the income that's coming from these properties to whoever this private owner is, and it's not the university, the Academy of Art. So I ask you to look at the record and see that. The next thing is the Academy of Art has recruited students, loaded them with debt from the state and the federal government. How many of those students they have recruited actually graduated? How many of them were spit out and actually were loaded with debt, paid for that rent in those housing units with that debt, and now don't have even a certificate to go by? That's information that should have been before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there any additional public comment?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Chris Martin. I'd like to speak on the proposed conversion of retail to the institutional uses. As the ESTM states, 2295 Taylor Street is within the North Beach Neighborhood Commercial District and the North Beach Special Use District, which encourages medium-scale and mixed-use commercial residential uses. Columbus, as you all know, Columbus Avenue is the heart of North Beach and connects with the northern waterfront and aquatic park. The North Beach Neighborhood Commercial District controls are intended to protect and ensure the viability of North Beach with its cafes, local taverns, small retail businesses, and nightclubs. The AAU has done substantial construction and modification to 2295 Taylor Street without any public review or building permits. Access to the building is restricted, and it requires a card key for entry. It is not an active storefront and does not contribute to the active uses along Columbus Avenue. It doesn't stimulate pedestrian activity. It's a blot on the neighborhood and a dead zone on a boulevard that needs life and activity. The building that's on that corner of Chestnut, Columbus, and Taylor, and it's a dominant location. It was one of the original Gap stores that the Fishers opened in 1967. There's a better use for that building than the AAU studios. I'd also like to speak on a building I'm very familiar with that my family developed over 50 years ago and that we operated until a few years ago, the Cannery. Several years ago, the Department of Planning commissioned Jan Gehl, the fantastic Danish architect known for improving urban centers, by reorienting city design towards pedestrians and the cyclists. Among his recommendations were to create an uninterrupted waterfront promenade, improving the pedestrian environment of the wharf, and improving ground floor frontage quality with sidewalk cafes and engaging activities. The AAU at the cannery is totally counter to Jan Gehl's vision. It will create a dead block at the terminus of Jefferson Street. Many people will venture no further. Gone are the sidewalk cafes, the imaginative retail stores, the public spaces that are landscaped, festival entertainment, farmers markets, and other activities. Thank you.
Somebody go.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Paul Wormer. I believe you received an email letter from the Pacific Heights Residents Association on this issue, talking about the concerns about illegal conversions, the need to replace or actually restore housing that has been removed from public use, and the concern about the spread. I won't go into the first two in detail, but I do want to point out on this map, which I did not put together. I'm just stealing someone else's idea here. But these little dots are their locations today. And the colored squares are their study areas. So what we're seeing is AAU is looking at the city and saying, how are we going to continue our sprawl? Now, I am a chemist by training. I've been involved in greenhouse gas, global warming issues, on and off since the early 1990s. Is there a single reason why we should approve a business that is dependent on conditional use, that by its design of property use spreads it out over such a large area that the only way it works for them is using a shuttle service that runs pretty much continuously during business hours and into the evening? How is this good for the city, not only in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but in terms of all of the other impacts of traffic? So this sprawl that they're proposing to continue is really, if you're developing a real estate empire and acquiring property as a real estate entity, that makes a lot of sense. If you're talking about creating an institution that has certain objectives which requires people to get together and work together, this is not good. It's not good for the city. It's not good for housing. And I guess my substantive comment with respect to the ESTM and the EIR, draft EIR, is I don't see that sort of integrated looking at the problem in those documents. And how are you able to assess what the real impacts are without looking at those sorts of overlays and integration so that you can make an informed decision about what's being proposed and should those uses be granted? Ownership clearly is fine, but what are the uses, and is it worth changing what we're doing? I'll have separate comments on the proposal to allow retail use for museums when those proposals come before you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joan Holden. I'm a playwright in the city. I've been part of a theater community that used to exist here. You see actors on stages here. You hear music played by musicians in clubs here, but most of them no longer live in the city. 15 years ago, this hearing would have been packed with artists. These artists were citizens. They were committed long-term to the city. Now they're gone. They're committed to other cities. The Academy of Art has obviously
its policy has been, its method has been to create facts on the ground that now you're asked to ratify. Every piece of every residential building and every SRO that you allow them to convert is an insult to the disappeared low-income workers and artists who could have lived there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Okay, not seeing any public comment is closed. Commissioner Antonini.
Thanks. First of all, thanks to staff who did a absolutely amazing job on the ESTM, and I was very impressed with its detail and its thoroughness, and the fact that in many cases it contrasted impacts from 2010 with 2016, which really gave us the idea of what is now happening relative to what the impacts were in 2010. So I think that's very important, and I think what we have to remember is there are a lot of things that need to go through the approval process, perhaps not be approved, perhaps be eliminated, but this is a huge institution with a huge impact, and we have to bear in mind that, for example, if all housing was eliminated for the students of the Academy of Art, which are currently housed, they would be fighting with other people for existing housing somewhere in the city. So we have to really look at that as a consequence as we look at how this is going to be handled. And so one of the things I'd like to suggest, I believe that the staff is suggesting, some of the housing not being approved, but another mitigating measure would be the approval of the building by the Academy of Housing to replace the housing that is now being used in some instances and allow that housing to go back into residential use, which would allow it possibly to be under rent control if it is a building that was old enough to be rent controlled. So that could be something which might be a solution to part of the problem. I saw your recommendations on various housing, and I think some of the ones that come from tourist hotels and other uses that never were long-term housing should be allowed to stay, and I agree with that. But I think we have to look very carefully at the existing housing being used to see how we can create something that creates new housing and also accommodates the needs of students who are currently at the Academy, because there are many institutions in San Francisco, and I was a student at one of them, that do not provide student housing for their graduate students, and they also compete in the marketplace with other people looking for housing. So that's important to look at the big picture there. On the other issue, you talked about the industrial land. I mean, I think that like most of your recommendations, I think we have to really look at these uses. There are possibly some where the Academy uses those previously industrial sites for training in the trades and skills needed in industry, so that could be considered a PDR use if it's training people in the sorts of skills that are no longer available. We used to have high schools like Poly and other schools that specialized in, Oakland Tech was called Oakland Tech because it was a technical school. We had a whole system of public schools that worked in training for the skills needed in technical jobs. Auto shop, wood shop, we don't see much of that anymore. So, I mean, I think these are important things to look at as we look at some of their uses in industrial areas. Other things on vacant ground floor retail, I think we have to, as any time we look at this, we have to look at, is there a lot of vacant space around where they are using or converting it into institutional uses? I mean, we have to bear that in mind when we make our decision as to whether to allow this conversion or not. Office to institutional uses, I think we just have to look at the scope of the building too. As was pointed out by the Academy, there's some buildings that might be better suited for an institutional use instead of an office use if they have very high ceilings or something that, suits itself for that sort of usage that is not as well used for office anymore. And certainly we seem to have a fight over the office cap, so it's not like we're not building a lot of new office, so we have to really bear these uses in mind. Then a couple of other areas here. You talked about religious, and those are some of the things that have actually been a good thing that has been done by the Academy, particularly St. Bridget's and the First Congregational Church, both of which would likely have been demolished or possibly would have been had they not been taken over by the Academy, seismically retrofit. And because the Academy is a for-profit institution, they have to pay property taxes, which was not the case when they were religious institutions. So I think your recommendation to approve those sounds like a wise one to me. And then a couple of other things that I noticed in here. It looks like in terms of process, the Planning Commission would hear any planning code changes first before the Board of Supervisors. So I think I understand what the process is there. Your study was very good. It looks like the period from 2010 to 2016, the Academy became less intense in terms of number of students, number of staff, and number of students and shuttles. And so that's important to know that there was a significant downward trend for a variety of reasons, as you point out, a lot more online, and perhaps a lot of students taking advantage of other types of transportation rather than using the shuttles. And then the other thing that I don't know if it's in there, I might have missed it if it's in there, but the question of awnings and signs and windows, I assume a lot of those have been already corrected, but, you know, because I know we worked with the Academy for a lot of years to have those signs eliminated, and then the life safety changes. I think it's important to point out which ones have been done and what hasn't been done, because that's the very first priority, is to take care of any life safety that remains. And I think I like the idea of your draft transportation plan. So I think these are a lot of steps in the right direction. It's going to be a long, laborious process, but it's not like, you know, the problem is going to go away if we just disapprove everything. No, it doesn't make any sense. It's like this is an existing institution. They need to become compliant. They need to pay all the fines and all the things they've done in the past. And then I think, you know, this is going to be a big job, but I'm happy it's getting started.
Commissioner Wu.
I wanted to ask staff, in order to look at, well, first of all, this report is really great. There's lots of great information in it, and the ESTM, I think you really created something new here, so whether that's good or bad, you did a good job. On the housing, so you've used this criteria of not, of recommending approval when there's higher intensity. So can I ask how that was applied to the building at 1916 Octavia?
Yes. Sorry, give me 1 second. So the property at 1916 Octavia is zoned RH2. So the maximum density permitted would be 2 dwelling units. And the last legal use was it says here residential hotel. I think I have to double check, because that might be different from what we were understanding when we were first evaluating it. But I think generally, because it's zoned RH2, we felt that if it were left to the open market, it would basically revert back to a 2-dwelling unit.
Well, I would like to see then some more history, maybe. I think that the fact that it says the legal use is 22 residential hotel units, I think it brings up a different sort of concept. So it may or may not actually be higher intensity, but even if it is, maybe the criteria should look at something more like, I don't know, resulting in additional units of housing or something like that, because 22 to 22 seems the same to me.
Definitely. And I think if we did find that it was a residential hotel, I think we would be inclined to recommend its approval and have it be served as such.
And there was a mixed history of that. I think also some of the records indicated perhaps residential care facility or senior housing. But with this, we felt that this would, if it were to go back and be on the private market again, it would most likely be converted to a large single-family dwelling or a two-unit building, and that this was a very intense use. So that was this.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you very much. I also echo that, Chelsea, fantastic job on the ESTM. I think this sets a great standard for how we can look at properties and how they're used and look at the environmental impacts of certain projects above and beyond CEQA in some cases. So this is really, really great work and very helpful for us. I remember when we were first started talking about the draft EIR, we had spoken about AAU in multiple hearings. When we finally saw the draft EIR, the biggest question for myself and I believe also most other commissioners was, well, if the baseline is whatever it is today, how can we really use the EIR to make project approvals in the future? Because we know that there was a history to these properties prior to the baseline of when the draft EIR was created, and the ESTM answers that. So I really appreciate the work here. In context with the feedback that you asked the Commission for, I'll start off with the ESTM. Again, great work. I think that it's pretty comprehensive. I think the only thing that I would say about the ESTM is I appreciated the inclusion of the trip generation analysis in the transportation appendix. But when I try to link that back to the description of the transportation circulation analysis and the housing impact analysis in the ESTM, I feel like there's something sort of ephemeral that's missing. In many cases, when we talk about VMT as a great example, I think Rose Hilton brought this up. When we've talked about transportation impacts, we often have started off by talking about parking as something that tends to induce trips. And I believe that in the case of an institution that has a campus where, especially with the housing, it's not just random locations that people are going to, they're very specific locations that the people in that student housing are supposed to be going to. I think you can make an inference between the housing and the level and the amount of trips that are going to be generated because you know where those people are going. And I kind of feel like the transportation and circulation analysis in the ESTM didn't really address that, sort of address the way that the placement of where they choose to have their student housing induces trips. And I'm not sure if that's part of the housing analysis or if that's part of transportation and circulation. But I kind of felt like that was sort of missing. And the reason I say that is because that's something key to what I've heard in public comment and what I've heard various commissioners talking about when they talk about where the housing is going to be located and whether or not when there is an inclination to approve or positively look at some of the conversions to housing. I believe that the location and proximity to the uses that those people are going to be going to is important, and it's not really addressed in the ESTM. So if there were any sort of thinking about the ESTM, I would maybe recommend that some sort of analysis or statement to that effect be added. But otherwise, I think that the ESTM is great, and I think it's a fantastic complement to the draft EIR. In support of that comment about the ESTM, in terms of the policy directives that drive the department's inclination to support or deny certain applications, I would follow that up. I mean, when talking as an example, looking at sort of the high-level sort of green and red, and when it's in color, reasons why the department would support or be inclined to support or deny certain uses, I would say that we should talk about explicitly whether or not a housing use is in close proximity to the remaining pieces of the campus, right? So, for example, whether or not we are inclined to support conversions of certain uses to certain other uses, I think that we should be considering the placement of housing to the uses that the Academy of Art expects that the students are going to be going to, and be disinclined to approve uses that are farther away from administrative and institutional uses. And I felt like that is something that we should be adding here as something that an area that we're looking at when we're looking at whether or not we're inclined to support or deny a particular case. And then, so I think that's sort of my big one. And then other than that, I have multiple comments on some of the individual cases. But I think from our perspective, I'm hoping staff agrees that I think that would be most useful when we start talking about those cases individually. I believe that I'm very supportive generally of how we're grouping together the cases in terms of looking at different uses. But okay, you're coming up, Chelsea.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that each individual site assessment will be coming back before the Planning Commission when you get your CUs, and they will be part of your staff report, and you will choose to adopt those conditions of approval. But if you see factual errors in the ESTM, it would be good to have those, or if you see areas of concern, we will modify them. So when you get them in your packet, they will be as complete as possible.
Thank you. I didn't see any factual errors. I think there were a couple of sites, particularly some of the ones in the North Beach area and also the Marina District, where I just have more specific separate considerations about those particular properties and their uses and what's there. And so I don't know that it's anything I would say today is going to impact what's in the ESTM or what's in the staff report, and so that's why I'm like, maybe we can wait till we see the actual cases.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that those can be discussed at those individual hearings.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I think one person in public comment, I forget whose name it is, it was right before Rose Hilson spoke, mentioned that there was no consideration of affordability levels of the housing that was converted to student housing. And I can see the point there, but I will say that I do feel like there was a good discussion in the individual studies of each property over which properties were rent controlled and which were not. So I think that gets us somewhere close to talking about that argument, even though we don't necessarily have the income levels in particular of the actual individuals that were living in those units. And then finally, just generally speaking, going beyond sort of my comments about transportation and circulation, my perspective on what we're looking at here as we start looking at this package is that AAU is like any other institution, and to me that means they have to support the infrastructure that they need for their operation and for their clients, in this case being the students. I think someone from AAU came up, their representative came up and mentioned that AAU could be compared to other urban institutions and other very dense urban settings. But the difference here is that I haven't seen in sort of intelligent and smart buildup of their infrastructure. I've seen sort of cannibalization of what's there, and there's a very, very fine sort of gray line there, and I think we've crossed it, and I think we have an opportunity now looking at their sites and potentially bringing them back into compliance or denying them and having the institution have to come up with alternatives to keep going. We have an opportunity here to guide them towards having a true urban campus and not just a bunch of sites all over the place sort of cannibalizing other uses in the city. Thanks.
Commissioner Richards.
There's an awful lot here. I think the first thing just say is to really hats off to the staff. The staff memo was brilliant. I couldn't have actually designed it in a better way. It's really easy to read and really easy to reference, specifically because it's page after page after page after page, and I really like that. I like the fact that you had tables. If you could add a column for the approving entity in the same colors you have as the band, that would make it 100% perfect. existing sites technical memorandum is amazing. I have to fully read it, and I have till maybe Memorial Day weekend to actually get through the rest of it. But it's amazing. Maybe we should outsource this function and to other cities, because I think it's a standard of excellence that everybody should compare themselves with. Please no.
I know.
Okay, now. One of the other things I keep saying every time this comes up, whether we have an institutional master plan from another university or not, is I really think the city needs to understand what the minimum policy threshold is for each institution for housing that needs to be provided for its student body. I think as I look at different post-secondary institutions, they go from 2% to 20%. Some we had Hastings came. I think they were in the 20% range. We have some that I've actually looked at are in the single-digit range. So, that in the future really needs to be something that I think needs to be looked at, and we need to get each institution there over a period of time, and that would be by building and newly creating units, not using existing housing stock. So I'll say that one more time. That all being said, I went to an urban campus. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. It was spread out over many, many, many blocks, probably not as many as what I'm seeing here on the map with the AAU. We had some shuttles. We walked a lot, and there were a lot of hills. So maybe that's not actually a bad thing. We'd actually space our classes out so that we could get there by walking rather than actually having to take a shuttle. I think I said this way back in hearing number one. I don't really have a horse in this race with the AAU. I do think there have been some good things that the AAU's done for the city, especially around historic preservation. I think around the economic vitality it brought to the city in terms of the money that's come in that the students bring and they spend. That all being said, there is a flip side to all of that as well. And I think that's what we're dealing with today is the land use issues, specifically around housing and I think commercial. I guess, Mr. Gresham, if you have a minute, can I ask you a couple of questions? So you presented on your slide a project, and I wasn't really clear what the project was. I guess my question when you said that struck me was, where do and don't you agree with the staff policy recommendations?
I think the observation for the Academy is that you have to look at the entire institution and all of the recommendations, both for the existing sites that are covered by the ESTM and those sites that are covered by the EIR, which are buildings that are, none of which are, by the way, residential. Mm-hmm. Because the question here is, how does the Academy move forward to function effectively in a way that it makes it compatible with the city and even improves its presence and contributions, some of which you mentioned, to the city? And that is a matter that would require really sitting down with the staff and going through all of their recommendations, which the director has said are tentative, they're subject to change, and to have that dialogue. That's really what we're asking for, is to have that constructive dialogue now that the facts are in. Rather than going, because I don't think it's a building-by-building discussion, with all respect.
Okay, sure, great. I guess maybe to staff, and I know this is certainly possible, but it may take some time. As I look at what we're doing on a holistic, thank you. As I look at what we're doing on a holistic basis, if we were to look that way, which we should look that way, is if they were today to convert these uses from A to B or X to Y, what would the impact be in terms of a nexus study, say, created around converting uses or housing? What would the fees be generated? I think what, as well, on the flip side would be what, if you look back at the time that this building was converted from X to Y, and we went back and made a determination, what are the amount of fines, the most we could have in terms of fines? So we could actually get a real picture here on whether a $10 million settlement is something that we'd like to wrap into a big agreement and look at it on a holistic basis or not. I don't know. I don't have enough context around all the financial impact that we've got here from all this activity, for lack of a better term. So I'd love to see that in some type of spreadsheet, and I know that's a lot to ask. I don't know as well, somebody brought up the eviction history of the buildings. I was just assuming that there were no evictions. There may have been buyouts, but that's something I'd like to understand. The part on the housing, which is a big one for me in addition to several others, if we were to take the units that are SRO units and dwelling units and we were to put them back on the market, the ownership, whether it's the limited liability corporations that exist or the trust or the AAU, whatever, they'd be bringing them back on at market rate. So it'd be kind of there wouldn't be really much penalty there because they're getting, the students pay for a semester or whatever per month, and then we charge somebody a market rate per month. So it's, I think it's something that if we looked at this in terms of a really big agreement, we probably should go back to when they were converted, what the rents were, and then actually add the 0.6% CPI every year and come up to a amount and say, well, if this tenant had stayed and here's what the vacancy rate was, this would generally be what the rent would be. And I know there's normally a standard turnover, and that's something that I think if these units were to come back on the market and they were subject to some type of an agreement, they should be offered in various ways at different rates based on what the attrition rate of the tenancy would have been, but also what they would be costing if the tenant was still there. It would have to be grounded in something that's logical. I'd like to understand, there's an awful lot here in these 700-800 pages. If we looked at all of the recommendations, and I generally agree with staff on the logic behind the recommendations, I do have a couple of kind of corner case questions, but if we generally agree that this is kind of the way we want to go, what would the impact be in terms of the physical environment? So, I looked at the map, and for me, the goal, and it makes sense for the AAU, is to really shrink the footprint. You become a lot more concentrated, I think, to Commissioner Johnson's point, and a lot more efficient. You're not running shuttles all over the place that have one person on them or nobody on them, polluting the environment, creating traffic issues as well. So I think understanding the recommendation and its actual impact on the environment would be something. Giving a finger in the wind would be nice. All the data is there, it's just we've got to kind of add it up. I think if there were some type of a master agreement, there has to be some type of thresholds on the TDM, like, hey, we'll let you have a shuttle go from point A to point B. However, if the ridership is under a certain level, sorry, no more shuttle, right? Or you have to do something to increase the ridership of it because we just don't want the impact on the environment is going to be still, we want to try to minimize it and actually cause some efficiencies for the AAU as well. I think Commissioner Johnson's word, she said cannibalized, I think the word I would use would be opportunistic. I think the way the footprint looks, the AAU has been opportunistic. Something's come up, they bought it, it's over here, it's over there, it's a motel, it's a, it's an office building on Hay Street. It wasn't really in regards with a lot of efficiency. If there were some, that's great because there was a lot of concentration in Lower Nob Hill, which you're getting benefit of in terms of efficiency and in relationship. I think the one question I have on the staff recommendation is we have a real issue. We're actually seeing building permits for hotels these days, not motels, but hotels. I would look at those sites, Mr. Gresham, from an AAU point of view and try to determine whether or not the motel can be demolished and made into some type of larger structure to house more students, to get you back into a higher level of percent of your students that actually live on site. But it looks like those are, again, far away from your core, so you're back to that kind of, I got to get them from A to X. So we're back to the inefficiencies. So maybe they're better back as motels or better back being developed as housing, dwelling units, and retail underneath. I don't know. But as the landholder, you have that opportunity to do that. So actually you can maybe make some trade-offs and actually make some money and make it better. I think, again, I come back with, I think some type of an overall agreement would be a great idea, development agreement, for lack of a better term. I think, though, you heard it, there's a lot of animosity and ill will that's been generated over the last couple of decades plus. So I'd make this statement, and I don't make it in a flippant way. I think the AAU has really breached the public's trust in terms of its handling of itself, in terms of the processes that we have, and that whatever we do, we kind of need something akin to like a tobacco settlement. Like, hey, 25 years of whatever, we're going to put some money in a a pot and we're going to address some of the issues that all that has caused. There may be some subtractions for the benefits, and I don't want to say that we're just going to come and nail it to you, but I think in order to get the public trust back, whatever agreement we have has to have some type of an escrow account. So here's the money, and if you step over the line on your stipulated judgment, you get 30 days to make it better, and then boom, if not, we take the fine out of the money, or we make it so that there's a real way that we can get this in a real timely manner rather than drag it out for years, which has really been a lot of the ire from the public. One comment on one of the items, the 150 Hayes that Ms. Hester brought up, just a corner case comment. A second office building, it's kind of an office building. It is an office building. It was an office building. There is housing around it, but it really should be used as kind of what it was for. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Moore.
I think this department deserves a national recognition for an extraordinary piece of work. Not is the subject matter difficult, but how it's handled, I am impressed. Having said that, for quite a few years, and that started with the first iteration of the institutional master plan, I've tried to figure out what the real mission of the school is, and I'm not talking about its artistic mission, but I'm talking about its delivery of teaching services in an urban setting where the buildings where they are and what they teach has always been not clear to any of us. Saying that, I think it is correct to observe the acquisition of properties more opportunity-driven, as the commissioners all noted, but with that comes indeed by now of what definitely deserves the word sprawl, with an inability to really properly account of where the conflicts are, how severe they are, and what it really takes to rectify it. And it's not, for me, just simply in acknowledging there's a CU, there's a DR, there's a code amendment, but I think that has to also be driven by a better understanding of how the institution works and how it wants to work in the future. Because as the institution has grown, it has always stated that they did not really want to describe how and where they operate, partially because they consider themselves dynamic. And that's a very fine word, but as to the reality of city planning, reasonable growth of policy and reality, dynamic in itself is by now a problem. And I do want to pick up on the transportation comments made by other commissioners. I see, for example, the ever-sprawling shuttle network to become a liability because in order to really fully evaluate its effect, one needs to not only look where it operates, but what is its effectiveness. And for years and years and years, for me it's almost now 12 years, I think, the major observation, and I happen to live in the middle of the many crossroads of their many campus locations, these shuttles are empty. And not are they empty only because they are small, but the big ones, the little ones, and the in-between ones are more than 90% empty. But they keep going and going and going, so I'm looking at the effectiveness, who they serve, what they serve, and when, and where are they going, and why are they going in the first place when there's nobody going. I do believe that the existing sites technical memorandum needs to take a closer look at full disclosure on what is taught in what buildings, how does it relate to students who study a certain subject matter and where they live, so that there's a proximity between certain concentrations of students living in a certain area in closer proximity to where they're going to school, and how it creates an overlay that creates more consistency and insight in what's going on. If we don't do that, I think we will continuously push impacts ahead of us which we can never fully gauge. At some point, I believe that we have to commit to a more disclosure in how the school operates, because any of us, be it the urban campus Commissioner Richards went through, the urban campus I went through, we all knew where we were going. The campus itself was an institutional setting that described to us where we're going as engineering students, as arts or business students. It was not just changing all the time. Here in this particular case, and I can only basically talk about my experience from the many comments made on institutional master plans, it was always a changing dynamic. And I think we need to bring some more clearly defined explanations to unchanging the dynamics and making it something slightly more predictable. And with that comes then a better understanding which buildings to look at for what purpose and how we shape our own ability to support their approval for continued use by the institution. The next thing I like to say is I am interested to know what in historic preservation's jurisdiction and our own, what interface do we have? Will we be jointly looking at historic preservation objectives and policy issues that deal with what we are concerned about? How is that being handled?
So, I mean, there are separate approvals required by the Historic Preservation Commission. I mean, we can detail a little bit more thoroughly if you'd like to know about that now, but certainly we can look at whether or not it's appropriate to have some joint hearings. I think most likely the issues that the HPC are dealing with will be very specific and very limited, and probably not necessarily to have a great deal of interface interaction, but we can certainly look at if that makes sense.
I think it would be essential for us to support each other in the most extensive overlapping issues, but also be cognizant that there are other things which come into play. That would probably be something that I would find personally helpful, because I am as interested in historic preservation as something we need to support as it is for them to understand of what our challenges are. And the last question I have, but that is something I might just do in a memo to staff, I have a couple of questions of additional clarifications on Ms. Chang's excellent memo and outline on the project update. She gave us a number of policies. I think there are 6 of them. In some of those policies, I would like to see additional clarification of what is involved, but it might not be the right forum here to further comment on that. I like a few more descriptors in there.
Commissioner Hillis.
So first, I agree with my fellow commissioners on the thoroughness and the usefulness of the staff report. I thought it was great to kind of synthesize everything that we've been talking about for the past couple of years. And I generally agree with the approach staff is taking, kind of the policy rationale behind, if when faced with the decisions about approval or disapproval, the recommendations or kind of the inclinations you've made. Certainly, we want to hear from neighbors as each of these come up. I mean, typically in a CU, you hear from those who live in close proximity, and as these are noticed, we'll get more information from neighborhoods, and particularly on the housing and the retail recommendations that are made. I mean, I think many people brought up the housing issues that the city faces, and we've taken offline housing over the years in how we kind of rectify some of that. Specifically, too, on the kind of the hotel conversions, they're the properties on Sutter Street, 817, 831 Sutter, and 620 Sutter. I just wanted to ask a question on those. About that, I mean, one requires a CU and one doesn't, and so if you could specify why that's the case. And were those kind of the history of those two? Were they, because they look as if they were housing at some point and maybe converted to hotels, but it'd be good to get more information. I mean, if you have it now or as part of the future discussion on.
So the one on 860 Sutter, was that one of them?
817 to 831, the one with the Commodore Club on the bottom, and 620 Sutter. And they're in the ones where it's the kind of tourist hotel. It's were those SRO tourist hotels or?
I mean, for both of these properties, we have the existing legal use as hotel, as tourist hotels.
Yeah.
And the reason for the different approval path is that they're in different zoning districts, even though they're close in proximity.
Okay.
One's in a C3G district, which allows it as of right, and the other is in an RC4 district, which requires the conditional use authorization.
So the one, the C3G allows student housing as of right?
But it allows the group housing with as of right, whereas in the RC4, group housing requires conditional use.
So just for, when we get those in the future, it'd be great to kind of understand the history of them too, like if they were operated as kind of tourist hotels or, because there's that SRO/tourist hotel that we've seen as an issue in these neighborhoods before. So some understanding about that. And also, discussions come up about what percent of the student population is housed in AAU-owned facilities, just how that may compare to other universities. And I mean, we've got, part of this is we're bringing up not only issues related to the CUs, but kind of these broader issues. Like, how would we ever enforce something like that it's required that 30% of students be occupied in AAU-owned facilities? And, questions came up about encouraging or requiring new facilities be built for housing. This process doesn't necessarily give us that ability. The institutional master plan process has been a little kind of, there's not a lot of teeth to it. They come and we talk about it and we kind of accept the institutional master plan and their intent, but, it'd be nice to get more teeth to that process as we go, and I guess when these come back to us, some recommendation on how we address some of those broader issues that were brought up. But I generally agree kind of where the approach that that was taken in the recommendations in the staff report.
Director Webb.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of summarize what I heard from Commission and to give us direction for the next few weeks. I think the date is July 28th. That will be the next hearing where we'll present the EIR to you for certification, as well as initiation of potentially some of the planning code changes for housing. I heard that you say that you had generally supported the policy basis for our early recommendations, with one addition, which was looking at the adjacency of housing to the actual institutional buildings to try to address the transportation issue. I heard a lot of support for looking holistically at all of the buildings, looking at the kind of intent of the campus. That was kind of the intent for the policy basis recommendations, but I think perhaps the thing to do for us when we come back to you with the first batch of approvals and disapprovals is to have a discussion about that and why, in the context of the larger institutional properties, we would be recommending the approval or disapproval for a particular set. So we will try to do that as we move forward. There was a specific request made about one project, the Octavia building. We'll do some more research on the legal basis for that building, where there was a request to delve a little bit more in detail on our policy basis, what the rationale for the policy direction was, and also to look at some benchmarking against other institutions, particularly on the percentage of housing, percentage of students that are housed. We'll try to do that as well. And then also at the history of how the buildings were used to the greatest extent possible, and looking at the potential fines and fees that would have been paid in the past had the buildings gone forward legally. So that's the list I have. I'm sure there's others, but I'm sure staff has been taking notes. But that's the kind of the list that I had from the commission comments that we'll take into the next phase of our work on this.
Okay. Commissioner Moore?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Great staff work, and we look forward to the next hearing in July.
Commissioners, just as a reminder, items 10A and B have been continued to June 2nd. So the only remaining item on your agenda, Commissioners, is general public comment.
Okay, is there any general public comment this afternoon?
That started like right before you walk in the room. Oh, yeah, second.
Cards in there.
We'll let the room kind of clear out for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
They're just letting people come up. Here.
Okay, continuing on general public comment.
Hello again, Commissioners. So as you all know, we are all fighting for the soul of our city. Each of us, no matter what position we hold, has an ethical obligation to do everything in our power to help keep our community from becoming a for-profit playground for the rich. I don't blame the rich or any of you. We have all been a part of a society that worshiped the rich and famous. Now we see the end times of this system that bends over backwards to accommodate projects whose sole purpose is profit. We are here before you today with a deeper sole purpose, to keep our teachers, artists, laborers, nurses in secure homes where they can raise their children and take care of their elders. I have been to thousands of public meetings over the years, like this one, and time and again, I have witnessed general plans being amended, zoning changed, and financing offered from the city coffers. When the public makes their case just to live, work, and breathe easy in our community, we are often told that your hands are tied. There is always a way to defend the community's will by supporting the essential purpose of laws, that is to enhance a vibrant culture and community. Be creative, listen to the public's comments, and find a way to make sure that the beast on Bryant is not a deficit to our city. We are glad to hear that this has been delayed to offer more chance to negotiate with the developer, and we certainly hope that Podell comes to the table and listens and recognizes and honors the proposals that he said have not been made by the people, but in fact have been made and submitted. So we can no longer also let specifically the affordable housing aspect of this be left in limbo because it doesn't have enough of a profit factor. That must be part of it from the beginning. I thank you for your time.
Okay, let me call a few more names. Come on up, sir. Mary Eliza Tracy Rosen, Jonathan Ute, and Spike Kahn.
Yes, David Gibson. Thank you very much for letting me continue to speak on this issue regarding 10A and 10B. It's just plain and simple. You people have to stop this. This gentrification has to stop. You adults, you professionals, so is the mayor, so are the public supervisors. You all have to stop this. I'm really getting tired of fighting gentrification here in the city. I'm tired of people sleeping on BART trains, buses, laundry mats. This will add to that. This has to stop. We've got 2 weeks. I would like an extension, so you have to meet with these people, the private developers. That's the bottom line. This really has to stop. Act like professionals and adults. Stop this nonsense. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Commissioners. I emailed a letter a couple of days ago, which you probably have gotten, Mary Eliza, again. So I'm not going to read the entire letter. I'm just basically going to say thank you for continuing this matter. We believe that there's still some area for negotiation with the developer, and it's good that we have that time, and we hope that you will, of course, consider the things we've been asking for before, 1:1 replacement for PDR, and I guess sort of what we're seeing once again is these deals are being made, and we just need to remember the people that are out on the street who've lost their homes because these deals are being made. And I guess there was another shooting today, so we'll be hearing about that again. And how do we keep these situations from happening? It seems like I also saw the media is getting ready to do a really big one-day event where they're going to actually deal with the homeless situation on the 29th, I guess, of this month. And this has got to be contributing to the homeless situation. That's what we're really concerned about. If you're concerned about the homeless situation, you've got to be concerned about gentrification, because that's basically what's pushing everybody out of their homes. Some people can afford to move to Vallejo, and some people really can't afford to move. So by allowing the affordable units and the affordability of the city to continue to skyrocket or slide, or however you want to describe it, we're just contributing to this whole situation. I'm certainly not holding you accountable, but it's part of the whole process. So whatever you can do to slow it down is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Hi. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Tracy Rosenberg from Pacific Felt Factory, from the BDon Bryant Coalition, and from Media Alliance. I want to say to you this afternoon, as you consider this project and as you have continued it once again, that I'm really hoping that you will start looking at these kinds of projects in a holistic kind of way. Because this is not the only mission-based luxury housing project that you are going to be seeing. There's 6 more in the pipeline coming in the next 3 to 6 months. And this is for a neighborhood where we have reached saturation point, according to your own studies, in the luxury housing marketplace quite a while ago. So the question becomes, what are we doing? We're studying, we're observing a problem, we are making the problem worse. There's a disconnect between our stated intentions and goals and the actions that we're actually taking, and what the not possible but predictable and expected outcomes of those actions are. And sometimes that happens because we're not looking at things holistically, we're just sort of taking it project by project, and we can't afford to do that anymore. In this particular situation, you have a fairly concrete community-based proposal in front of you. It's probably not perfect. No proposal is, but it really lays out the kinds of actions that we can start taking so we can turn these projects one by one into things that will not have the exact predictable outcomes that we are saying in our own reports over and over and over again that we can't have. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That needs to stop, and this project is a really good place to say, if we want different outcomes, we have to start doing different things. So I encourage you to take advantage of this period of time to do something different and to do something better for our city and for this neighborhood. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Jonathan Ute. About 16 years ago, I stood before this commission and was asking the President, Anita Theoharis, if she would imagine in the future a San Francisco without arts, a San Francisco without musicians, a San Francisco without communities of color. And she was frustrated with my comments because I was doing it in the voice of her grandchildren and asking, Grandma, why is it this way? What did you do, or what couldn't you have done? And anyway, she took about 30 seconds of my time to scold the audience for, getting sort of animated. At which point, I got my time back. I said, I had prepared 3 minutes. I'm going to continue to speak the full 3 minutes, even though you took 30 seconds of my time. Anyway, at that time, the buzzer rang, and I continued to speak, and she gavelled for a sheriff's bailiff, who continued to wrestle me to the ground, and it made front page papers in the San Jose Mercury News, San Francisco Chronicle, Oakland Tribune. It ran for 2 days on the news. .com battle gets ugly. So here we are, 16 years later, and you have an opportunity to initiate some policy changes that mandate community planning process. I was fortunate enough to be part of a community planning process with Citizens Housing back in 2002, and the Mosaica project is the result of that. Now, what happened was we undertook nonprofit partners. CellSpace was an organization that I was the founder of. We were a community partner. There was other nonprofits involved, and we made every effort to reach out to all of the stakeholders. And as a result, we met for months and months, and we hammered out all these details. And as a result, when the project was finally sort of envisioned, it came before this commission, and was approved. If we don't do a community planning process, what happens is what we're seeing. We had over 200 people confirmed to speak today, and that is because they have not been heard. The developer is not willing or interested in meeting with the community because he's interested in satisfying his Wall Street, high-yield, speculative real estate investors and not the community. Thank you.
Speaking of Wall Street, the Junius Fund, which is part of J.P. Morgan Chase, it's a high-yield, high-return fund requiring 20% return. That's part of why Podell is saying he doesn't have the money to do anything better than the absolute minimums required by law. And this is the biggest project that you've seen before you from the mission in a while, and there hasn't been any affordable built there in a long time, and now we have the opportunity to actually work it. So we did a rough sketch, which is down here, of what amount of profits we're going to be seeing by these minimums. That's 18 million in profits. I think there's some wiggle room to do more than the minimum. And these are figures based on meetings with Olson and the community and the Developers Builders Association, who came up with the idea of $600 a door is what it costs to build a project. So we haven't seen his books. We're hoping that, like SKS, right across the street, he will meet with some of our people that would then sign a confidentiality and agreement and go over the pro forma to see if there really isn't any wiggle room. Then, like with SKS, we will figure out what's the best deal that we can come up with that will provide affordable housing, that will retain and protect the PDR that's being lost, that is the backbone of the mission's affordability. When you have blue-collar jobs where you can be monolingual Spanish-speaking without an education and be a middle-class earner for your family. And what this project, the propaganda that we've been seeing from Podell's PR firm, that he's going to take a blighted block and build this nice slick building there. This was 2 years ago a thriving community. 2 years ago we had union jobs at ACT doing work that is now shipped out and given to Canadian workers. This was auto repair where middle class guys were raising a family on that salary. This was CellSpace, which Jonathan talked about. This building has such a potential. We have a moderate plan that is asking for 10,000 more square feet, and that would make it a 50% affordability. So we are thankful that the pressure of not rubber stamping this didn't happen today, and that we are going to go and sit with them. And hopefully we will be able to do something. I've just raised on the phone here a couple $1 million in community neighbors who are willing to put money for affordable housing, along with Labor's Local 261, who's going to come up with $5 million. So we have money that we don't require 20%. We require breaking even. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other general public comment?
Hello, my name is Andrew Pollock. I'm known as Paradox Pollock in the artistic community. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here before you. This is the very first time that I am addressing government in a way that is not with a drum or an upraised fist. This is the first time that I'm coming directly to speak to government and to say, I do not hold you in contempt for your actions yet. The time this time that we're in is one where the government is clearly seen for the first time in a participatory way to be called to communicate with the people. There is a democracy that is being born that is very different than what has been before. And in this time, people will come and they will want to share and they will have strategies. They will have ideas. They will crowdfund. They will find ways to raise the money. They will find ways to communicate to their constituency and actually create something of value for them. What I'm asking you to consider is that it is the communication that is vital, that it is the communication that happens between us, the people, and you, the representatives that speak to the greater representatives that set the codes and laws. There are managerial elements of what's being done, but there are strategic elements too. And there are a lot of brilliant people who are willing to work with you to find answers that are not just for the ones who have the most money and can afford to send their agents here to be manipulated to do their bidding. There are people who live here. There are wise people who live here. There are people who are willing to work with you. Please, please listen to us before it's down to torches and pitchforks. Because it's a time. This is a time. We're in a time. And it's changing. I don't know how long y'all have been here, but it's changing, and we all know this. So please, just consider what time we're in, and that there are very many people who are willing to work with you, and who are willing to work on the strategies that can afford an actual communication with the people, not just the 1%. Thank you so much.
Eric Aguelo, Kim Waldern, Andrew Pollock, and Rodney Ewing.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. My name is Eric Arguello. I just wanted to talk about cumulative effects of all this development that's coming into the mission. You know, we are the founders of the Latino Culture District. We have about 5 large developments that are coming into the Latino Culture District in the next month or two. We're talking about, 2,000, maybe 2,200 market rate units coming into the mission. We really need to look at the bigger picture of what's really happening. I know we're not done with our MAP 2020 yet. Our SUD for the Latino Culture District is not in place. So we really need to slow down and to look at these projects and how they can really benefit the community. Right now, what we're seeing is with these developers that they're creating a lot of smoke and mirrors as far as the numbers go and what the benefits are to the community. So we have to look at these projects really close, look at those numbers and how they add up to what they're actually, putting out to the media and to the community as a favor to the community and the benefits that they're giving to the community, because they're really not. So I'm glad that the Beast on Bryant was continued. Those numbers that were coming out were not accurate. What was being put out in the media and by their supporters, the pro-development folks in the neighborhood, not even in the neighborhood, but outside the neighborhood. So we really need to look at that closely, look at those numbers, add them up, and how do they really, truly benefit the community. what we're also requesting, in the Latino Culture District is hopefully a report for a socioeconomic report for our area. The Eastern Neighborhoods Plan did an EIR, but the Latino Culture District was not in place at that time. So this is a new day. We need to look at things differently and not what was done in the past that has not worked today, and that's why we are in the situation that we are today. So I'll ask you to look at things differently, look at things closely, and making sure they truly benefit the community. Thank you.
My name is Kim Waldron, and I'm here to talk about 2000 Bryant, although I live in the outer Richmond. And the reason I'm butting my nose into another neighborhood is it's clear that this is setting the precedent for what's going to happen in the Mission, what the Mission's going to look like with the other projects in the pipeline, which means it's setting the precedent for what's going to happen in Excelsior, in Tenderloin, or any neighborhood where there's people with less than average incomes and where they live. It's good that you did the delay, and I'm hoping you'll keep the pressure on, because what's happening in the city is insane, and obviously we all need to do everything we can to fix it. And I just conclude by reminding you what Fran Lebowitz once said about Manhattan. There's a lot of things you can say about a city of mostly rich people. There's good things you can say about a city of mostly rich people. There are bad things you can say about a city of mostly rich people, but you can't say it's interesting.
Good afternoon. My name is Rodney Ewing, and I'm here to talk about what I've been seeing. I'm an artist. I'm also an educator, so I can talk to you about what's happening in both those areas. My friends and my coworkers are leaving. They can't stay here. When you start putting things up like the Beast on Bryant and other developments are going on in Mission, and other developments are going on in the city, and you call them market rate housing, they can't stay here. They're picking up their practices, and they're not moving just away from San Francisco. They're not moving to the East Bay. They're not moving to Richmond, because that's already getting tapped out. They're not moving to Oakland. They're not moving to Vallejo. My friends who are teachers where I work here in San Francisco at an independent school, they're already commuting an hour each way every day, sitting in traffic. To ask them to move even further out because they can't afford to live here, because they can't afford to live close to their work, it's to the point where a friend of mine, her sister-in-law and brother, their choices are Santa Clara or Portland. That's ridiculous, to the point where people have to pick up and leave. And these are people who are educated, they're professionals, they're doctors, they're nurses, they're your accountants. They're people who provide those mid-level services for you that we all depend on, and they can't stay here. My friends who are artists are the same way. Most people think of artists like these people who can just sort of live and work anywhere. We're flighty, we're flaky, we can do anything. No, most of my friends who are artists, it's a 9-to-5 job, it's a 9-to-9 job, it's a 9-to-12 job, and they can't stay here because they have to be concerned about where they make work, where they're going to live, and how they're going to make money. And for them, it's too much. They much rather move to New York, where they're supported in their culture, and they're supported in their value in what they do, than stay here in the Bay Area. And it just makes me sad to see that my friends are getting to the point where it's just leaving. So where does that leave us? You don't have anybody to teach your kids. You go into a culture decline where everything starts looking the same. It's already a drop in the African American population here. They've been leaving for years. So with this Beast on Bryant, we're just asking you, as some people have been saying earlier, it's setting a precedent. It's setting a very bad precedent where it's a slap in the face to people who've really loved the city, who've bought into the city, who've bought into the various cultures, and they can't stay here. Thank you very much.
Next speaker.
Hello, Commissioners. I'll be brief. Peter Papadopoulos with the Cultural Action Network.
And thank you for the continuance. I think it's an important step to try to figure something out here. I just want to talk about a couple things briefly in a more general way that I think the Beast on Bryant is in a strong relationship to that I would ask you to think about. We've got right now, to our calculation, about 2015 luxury units coming into the Mission in the pipeline. We don't think the Mission can withstand that in any way that doesn't destroy its socioeconomic fabric at that point. That's the way the Mission community is viewing this at this point. And we don't think it's at all necessary. I mean, Spike Kahn just showed you some numbers. We would love to see the developers' numbers. If developers' main line of argument is going to be, this is legal and I can't afford anymore, then we would like to see their pro formas, because this is a minimum offer still. My parents tell me they see us on the news all the time on the East Coast. Someone just said, hey, my mother from Guatemala just called, the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, to ask, am I okay? Am I going to get evicted? Because we're on TV all the time in Guatemala. And we still have developers coming with minimum offers. That's what the community is really, frankly, shocked by, that a minimum offer would be pushed forward like this. This is still a 35% off-site dedication, essentially, which, while the media is a little confused, I think you all get it. It's a 26% of footprint dedication, right? It's still a minimum dedication, and I think they could do a lot more. This is 26% of his footprint, so he paid $9 million for it. That's where he is mathematically. And we would love to see his numbers. Some people are sharing the numbers. Tillman on Mission Street has shared his numbers with the community and said, let's go over them. So as Spike's number showed, 100% union built, 100% PDR retention. We're at 213% over our Mission pace for PDR loss. And 50%, a true 50% land dedication, that still shows a significant profit, at least on our back of the napkin math. We don't have the real math. We can only do the math the developers do when they sketch out a project. We would love to see the real math. We think the developer can do a lot more. We know that labor has some very innovative ideas, and some people in this room are working right now. They're working the phones to find innovative solutions to financing this. So we really appreciate the continuance, and let's ask the developer to do a lot more. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. This is Rick Hall. I was here last week and spoke on the Corovan project. And at the time, and I won't repeat everything I said, but remember I was talking about the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan and its pace and the UMU zoning, a lot of issues that are clearly problematic at this time. But I stayed and listened to some of the questions and answers last time, and I was somewhat concerned. And I'm glad for the Beast now. We have 2 weeks, and I think there's something that you guys can use that 2 weeks for, in addition to all the things you've heard about. Because when I watched planning answer Mr. Richards' questions last week about where we stand in the plan and the numbers, and it was interesting, but most interesting was the data she didn't present and the questions she didn't answer, or answered with, when asked a question, answered with a different question. Her numbers showed that the basis for the EN plan EIR that these CPEs rely on are virtually obsolete. She provided you with numbers for options A, B, and C that were studied without telling you the exact figures that were applicable to the plan as adopted by the board supervisors, which is between B and C. I'm sure they know what those numbers are. They've shared them for the PDRs. She admitted we're close to being to the point where CPs can't be approved. Then diverted the discussion of how they keep up with the changes in the impacts and mitigations along the way, to be sure that when they're recommending a CPE, that They'll never recommend a CPE that they feel that they shouldn't feel. Does that mean planning is redefining the basis for the EN plan with new impacts and mitigations when they are considering how they feel about recommending a CPE? Could this possibly be a legal standard for approval? I sincerely doubt it. And I believe that the Commission has a duty to investigate this before accepting recommendations on this basis. You know, until this is cleared up, I'll be recommending you deny every CPE. For example, in the mission, we have a list of projects that show net housing units completed or under environmental review as of 2/23/16. I'll just leave it for you. But clearly, we've exceeded them all, A, B, and C.
Okay, is there any other general public comment this evening? Okay, not seeing any more. General public comment is closed, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.